The sea had never sounded like this to Stannis Baratheon before Blackwater. Once it had been a familiar roar, the breathing of a harsh but honest god. Now every crashing wave was a memory, every hiss of foam the scream of burning men. Rain needled his face as he stood atop the wind-scoured battlements of Dragonstone. Torches guttered along the wall walk, their light weak against the night. Below, the sea clawed at the basalt base of the island like something hungry. Stannis stared east, toward where King's Landing lay beyond the curve of the world, though he could not see it. He saw it still in his mind's eye, the green sky, the ships splitting and blooming into fire, his fleet breaking like rotten wood. He did not flinch at the memory. He would not give the world or his gods that much. They say the sea remembers every ship that drowns, he muttered, voice a low rasp lost beneath the wind. Let it remember mine and choke on them. The rain thickened. It beaded on his mail and soaked through the heavy wool of his surcoat, but he felt none of it. Inside, he was all iron and burning coals. Defeat still tasted sour on his tongue. Defeat and ash. Blackwater had broken many men. It had not broken him. A Baratheon did not break. He bent, if he must, and then he sprang back harder than before. Yet even iron hammered often enough could crack. Behind him, the fortress loomed. Old Valyrian stone, scaled and twisted as if the whole island were a petrified dragon in mid-coil. Fires burned in arrow slits and tower windows, warm pockets of orange against the cold. Somewhere within, his queen prayed among her jars of pickled relics. Somewhere, his daughter read by candlelight, her finger tracing letters over gray-scaled skin. Somewhere, Melisandre watched the flames and saw futures that would not die. He could feel her even now, like the dry ache of a half-healed wound. The Red Woman had told him he would sit the Iron Throne. She had shown him victories in the fire, a city taken, a usurper's head upon a spike. On Dragonstone's dark shore she had birthed shadows that slew his brother, and still he had been beaten. Why? He whispered to the wind. I did what you asked. The rain gave no answer. The sea gave no answer. The old gods were trees and stone, and there were no weirwoods here. The seven. They had never answered him, even as a boy. Only R'hllor had whispered back, through Melisandre's lips and fiery visions. Only R'hllor had promised him what was his by law and by right. And yet Joffrey Baratheon still sat his chair of swords, if the boy still lived at all. If the wildfire had not eaten him as it had so many of Stannis's own men. His hand clenched on the cold, wet stone of the parapet until his knuckles ached. He thought of Renly, laughing and golden in green armor, crushed beneath a shadow shaped like Stannis himself. He thought of Robert, roaring and drunk, wearing his crown as though it were a burden made of feathers instead of iron. He thought of himself, always the second son, the one given to patchwork and repair while others feasted and sang. All of it for nothing, if the gods meant to mock him. All of it for... Footsteps sounded on the stair behind him, muffled by the rain. He did not turn. Only one person in this castle would seek him out here at such an hour. The night is cold, your grace, came Melisandre's low voice. Even with summer not long past, the world tightens like a bowstring. The world can go hang, Stannis said without turning. The world chose its king and spat on the lawful one. Let it suffer for the choice it made. The world did not choose, she answered calmly. The world is asleep. It is blind. It stumbles in darkness, and only a few see the dawn. You are one of the few, Stannis Baratheon. You are the one who must wake them. He heard the soft rustle of her red robes as she came to stand beside him. The glow from her ruby gem painted a faint, bloody sheen across his wet mail. He finally turned his head. Her red eyes watched him, unblinking, reflecting a light that did not come from any torch. I saw you in the flames tonight, she said. I saw you upon the wall of ice at the end of the world, sword flaming in your hand. The night bent around you like a living thing. The wall, Stannis's brow nodded. That's leagues away and more besides. I have no men to spare for empty stone and wild savages." "It is not empty stone," Melisandre said, "and the savages you speak of are less to be feared than what comes for them. There are powers stirring in the far north that care nothing for thrones of men. They care only for night without end." Stannis snorted. "Old tales told to frighten children. I have real enemies. Lannisters, Freys, Tyrells, ailments of law that must be mended." She did not flinch at his scorn. "The flames do not lie, your grace. The Iron Throne is but a chair, cold metal, dead and still. What comes from the north is not dead and will not be still. If you seek only a throne, you will lose both it and the world beneath it." He turned away sharply. "I have lost enough," he said, voice suddenly darker. "Men, ships, brothers. I lost a son in that bay." The words came harder. "And for what? For promises in the flames." For a heartbeat, pain washed across Melisandre's pale face, there and gone like lightning behind clouds. "Sometimes," she said, "to save a world, a man must lose what he loves. You have been tested, Stannis Baratheon. Fire refines iron. It does not break it. The sea breaks ships," he muttered. "And even now it returns what it has taken," she said quietly. "Your hand crawls back from its depths as we speak. And with him, a message from the far north that will set your true task before you." He stared at her. "Davos is dead." "No, your grace." Melisandre's lips curled in a small, knowing smile. "Not yet. The flames have more work for him to do, as they do for you." Stannis looked back out at the Black Sea, where waves crashed and broke and crashed again, tireless without memory. For the first time since Blackwater, something other than blind anger stirred in his chest. The wall, the end of the world, and him upon it, a flaming sword in hand. He did not believe in prophecies. He believed in duty, in oaths, in written law and the weight of a man's word. But if duty led north instead of south, he scowled into the darkness, as if he might find an answer there. The sea gave none. The sea remembered Davos Seaworth all too well. It had nearly taken him a dozen times before Blackwater, but he had always slipped away like an eel, laughing with his men after. This time there had been no laughter, only green fire and screams and the sudden, crushing weight of water. He had thought he was dead when the sea closed over his head. It had been almost a relief. The green light was everywhere. His skin had burned, even beneath the surface. Mathos had been there one moment and then not. His face a mask of horror as the great royal galley had burst apart around them. Davos had seen his son's hand reaching, fingers spread, and then a wall of wildfire had swallowed the world. When he awoke, it was to gray light, a sky the color of old bones, and the taste of bile and salt choking his throat. He clung to a broken spar, knuckles white, waves rolling beneath him like the backs of cold, indifferent beasts. Charred timbers bobbed nearby, and here and there a pale face turned to the clouds, mouths open as if still screaming. "Mathos," Davos croaked, though there was no one to hear. His fingers tightened on the wood until they cramped. Water slapped at his bare feet. His boots were gone, along with half his dignity and all his illusions. He had believed in Stannis as he had believed in nothing else. Believed in the hard, unyielding justice of the man, in the iron sense of right that had carried a second son from Storm's End to Dragonstone to claim what was his. But on the bay, Davos had seen another truth, green and savage. He had seen that gods who demanded fire might give it with both hands and then ask more still. The sun was only a pale disk behind the low clouds when he saw the ship. A Lysine cog, by the gaudy blue and yellow paint on her hull and the bright patchwork sails. She rode low in the water, overladen, perhaps, or simply old and tired. To Davos, she was more beautiful than any maiden he had ever seen. He tried to shout. The sound that came out of his raw throat was more croak than call, but someone must have heard. The cog crept closer. Figures crowded the rail, pointing. A ladder splashed over the side, swaying with the waves. Davos kicked, teeth gritted. every stroke a hot knife in his burned arms. By the time rough hands hauled him over the railing, the world had narrowed to the deck beneath him and the frantic gallop of his heart. He collapsed on soaked planks, coughing seawater and soot, his vision swimming. "Seven, save us!" someone exclaimed in accented common. "Look what the sea has spewed up. He's half-cooked." "Half-cooked is still meat," another voice said. "What's your name, corpse?" Davos blinked up at them. Sun-browned faces, gold hoops and ears, a few tattooed tears at the corner of one man's mouth. Lyseni, sure enough. He licked his cracked lips. "Davos," he rasped. Ser Davos Seaworth." A laugh that wasn't quite a laugh broke out of him. "Knight, smuggler, fool." "Ser Smuggler," the first man said. "You're far from any harbor that would claim you." "Blackwater," Davos coughed. "The King's fleet. The battle." They exchanged glances. "The bay burned," one said at last. "From shore to shore. We saw the clouds even out here. They said no one lived." "Some of us did," Davos said. "Not enough." A shadow fell across him. He squinted up to see a man with a salt and pepper beard braided with gold wire, rings thick on his fingers. His clothes were finer than the others, but stained and worn from sea life. His eyes were hard and calculating. Well, the man said. "I know that face. Davos Seaworth, they call you. King Stannis' smuggler. They say he made you a knight for bringing him onions." He snorted. "Salador San knows every story worth listening to." "Sala?" Davos breathed, relief and dread warring in his chest. You thought I would stand in front of wildfire for your king," Salador said dryly. "I like you, old friend, but not enough to burn." He crouched down, studying Davos with something like concern under the mockery. "You are lucky the sea spat you in my path. Or unlucky, depending on what you think of more years with me." Davos pushed himself up on shaking elbows. "Take me to Dragonstone," he said. "Please, I must speak to the king." Salador's mouth quirked. "To tell him what? That his fleet is gone. That his cause is broken? He knows." The Lysene shook his head. "He flew too close to a son of green fire, your king. Now he is a shadow on a rock, and there is no profit in shadows." "There is law in him," Davos said stubbornly. "Justice. The realm still needs that, even if it does not know it." "The realm," Salador said, standing. "I care what the realm pays, not what it needs." He paused. "But for you, Davos, I will make one more bad bargain. I am already bound for Dragonstone to seek my pay or my leave. You may crawl into some corner of my hold and stink it up until we arrive." Davos closed his eyes. Mathos's face rose behind his lids again, framed in emerald light. He opened them with an effort. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me yet," Salador said lightly, turning away. "You may regret living long enough to see what is left of your king." Davos lay on the deck, the ship's gentle roll beneath him a small, deceptive kindness. The sea had spared him. For what purpose, he could not say. But he knew this much. He would not die with words unsaid. Not while Stannis Baratheon still breathed and listened, however poorly, to the counsel of men and the whispers of fire. The chamber of the painted table smelled of smoke, beeswax, and old wood. Shadows clung to the high, vaulted ceiling. The great carved map of Westeros dominated the room, its forests and mountains burnished by generations of lordly hands. Tiny carved lions crouched on the crownlands, a stag on Storm's End, a wolf on the north. The Iron Throne itself was marked only by a jagged crown of lines scratched into the wood at King's Landing, as if someone had taken a knife to the grain in sudden fury. Stannis stood at the head of the table, fingers pressed flat on its surface. A candle guttered near his hand, dripping wax onto the neck. He could feel the grain beneath his skin, ridges and whorls like wrinkles on an old man's face. The kingdom he should have ruled lay beneath his palms, and yet it might as well have been a painting of some far, bright star. "Renly's men have gone to the Tyrell girl's boy king," Celis was saying, her thin mouth pinched. Faithless, the lot of them. They will all burn for it. They will pay for it, Stannis corrected. Burning is no punishment if it comes after a man is dead. She frowned, not quite understanding. She had never understood the difference between justice and vengeance, between the law and the satisfaction of seeing one's enemies suffer. To her, they were the same. Melisandre stood opposite. The ruby at her throat cast a bloody oval on the map. Her eyes were on Stannis, not the table. They were always on him, as if she could see something beneath his skin, in his very marrow. "You must not dwell on what is lost, your grace," she said. "The flames dance with what is yet to be. What is lost is half my strength," Stannis snapped, looking up. "Ships, men, the trust of lords who bent the knee and now are carrion for crabs. Am I not to reckon that cost?" "You must reckon it rightly," she answered, "as the price paid toward a greater purpose." "Easy to pay in other men's blood," he said. "Easier still for gods who sit in fire and feel nothing." Celis gasped softly, scandalized, but Melisandre only tilted her head. "You have every right to question," she said. "Doubt tempers faith. A sword untempered breaks. Ask your questions, Stannis Baratheon. Then come with me to the fire, and you will see why the price was paid." Stannis's jaw worked. He felt exhaustion like iron weights on his shoulders. "And what will I see?" he demanded. "More lies of victory? Another vision of that thrice-damned chair, just out of reach." Melisandre's lips curved. "No," she said. "Tonight, the flames have no interest in iron chairs. They are fixed on ice." He frowned, but something in her tone, calm, utterly certain, stilled him. He had come to hate the firelight on the bay. Yet he could not deny that Melisandre had shown him things that were not lies. Renly's death had proven that. "Very well," he said at last. "Show me." Celis clutched her hands together, knuckles white, as Melisandre moved to the hearth. The fire there was banked low, embers smoldering orange in the ash. The red woman raised her hands, murmuring a word in some harsh, ancient tongue. The fire stirred as if roused, a dog at its mistress's call. Flames licked up, crackling, feeding on nothing Stannis could see. He stepped closer despite himself. Heat washed over his face. Melisandre's eyes glowed, reflecting the flames so that they seemed to burn from within. "Look," she whispered. "Look and see what the Lord of Light would have you see." Stannis stared into the flames, jaw set. At first he saw only fire, orange and red, tongues twisting, sparks rising. Then slowly the colors deepened. Patches of blue bled into the orange. The flames narrowed, lengthened, became wavering curtains. Snowflakes, impossible, born of fire, drifted through his vision, each one bright as a falling star. He saw a wall of ice, impossibly high, stretching into darkness. Shadows moved along its top, men in black, tiny against that vastness. The snow beyond it glowed faintly with a light that was not the sun, cold and uncanny. Then the shadows came. They moved like men, but something was wrong with the way they walked. A jerkiness, a stiffness, as if their joints remembered a different life. Their eyes were points of blue, brighter than sapphires, colder than anything Stannis had ever known. Behind them, shapes loomed. Dead horses with rags of flesh on their bones, giants with milky, sightless eyes, things that had once been bears or wolves but now were only hunger wrapped in rotting fur. The wall itself shuddered as if it too were afraid. Stannis felt his throat tighten. Heat from the fire roared against his skin, but he tasted cold, sharp and metallic on his tongue. His breath misted before him, though he stood mere feet from the flames. "They come for all," Melisandre's voice murmured in his ear, though he had not heard her move. "South and north, king and beggar, old and young. They care nothing for names or rights, only for the living's breath and the dead's silence." The vision shifted. He saw a man standing atop the wall, sword raised, cloak snapping in a wind that cut as deep as any dagger. Stannis could not make out his face, but he saw the set of his shoulders, stubborn and unbowed. The sword in his hand blazed with light, not fire's wild dance, but a hard, steady glow that burned white at its core. Behind the man, others rallied. Black cloaks, fur-lined, torn and patched. Wildlings with bones braided in their hair. Men in plate and male with banners he could not clearly see, flapping like ravens' wings. In the distance, a shadow loomed that made the wall look small. Stannis flinched back, suddenly breathless. The fire was only fire again, though it hissed and spat as if angered by his retreat. What was that? His voice came harsh and low. Truth, Melisandre said softly. The truth that lies beyond thrones and crowns. The true war, your grace. All else is shadows on a wall. Celis sank to her knees, whispering prayers to the Lord of Light, her eyes wet. Stannis did not kneel. He looked from the fire to the map on the table, then back. The north lay etched there, pale and distant. Beyond it, the wall was only a thin line of white paint. Lines on wood against what he had just seen. How far is it? He asked, surprising himself. From here to that wall. Melisandre's eyes brightened. Far, she said. Farther than any southern king has thought to ride in 100 years. But not so far for a man who would be more than king. I have not abandoned my claim, Stannis said automatically. My right. Your right will mean nothing if no one lives to bend the knee, she said, not unkindly. You saw them. They will not stop at the wall. They will not stop until the world is night. The Lord of Light shows you this because he has chosen you to stand against it. He thought of Blackwater again. Green fire devouring ships and men and hope. He thought of the wall in the flames, encased in blue. Two fires, one hot, one cold, both swallowing. The true war, he repeated, voice flat. Yes, Melisandre said. And for that war, you will need men who know the cold and lands that have tasted snow. You will need the north. Stannis looked down at the wolf carved on the map. Its carved snout pointed stubbornly southward. The north has always been slow to answer any king, he said. It may be slower still for one who asks it to fight ghosts. Then you must give it something more than a king, Melisandre said. You must give it a Stark. They brought Davos to the great hall as if he were a prisoner, though no chains bound his hands. That was almost worse. Chains would have been simple. He knew what to do with iron on his wrists. Endure, wait, count his chances. This was different. This was walking into the judgment of a man whose word meant more to him than any gods. The hall of Dragonstone felt larger than he remembered. The painted banners drooped from the rafters, their colors dulled in the dim light. A line of Queen's men flanked the path to the dais, their faces stiff and self-righteous. The red god's flames burned in iron braziers along the walls, their smoke a faint, spicy tang beneath the thicker smell of damp stone. At the far end, Stannis sat on a plain chair carved with the stag of his house. It was no iron throne, but he wore it as if it outweighed the world. His face was leaner, harsher, the lines at the corners of his mouth carved deeper. Melisandre stood to his right, red robes pooling like blood around her feet. Queen Celis perched on a smaller seat, her eyes bright and brittle. Davos' heart thumped against his ribs as he walked the length of the hall. His step had a slight limp now, and his burns pulled when he moved, but he kept his back straight. He had left 4 of his finger bones in a pouch against his heart for years as a reminder of his crime and his king's justice. Those bones lay now at the bottom of Blackwater Bay with Mathos. His fingers felt naked without them. He stopped 6 paces from the dais and bowed as best he could. Your Grace, he said hoarsely. For a heartbeat, Stannis said nothing. His eyes raked Davos from head to foot, lingering briefly on the burns seared up one side of his face and neck. There was something like surprise there, quickly buried. You live, Stannis said at last. By luck or the 7 spite, Davos replied, mouth twisting. I washed up on Salladhor San's cog. Salladhor has left us, Celis said sharply, as if his name were sour on her tongue. He whined for more gold, and when it was not scraped from the stone for him, he ran. "Salador goes where profit does," Stannis said. His gaze did not leave Davos. "You should have burned on that bay, Davos. Many better men than you did." "Yes, your grace," Davos said quietly. "My son among them." Silence fell heavy at that. Somewhere high in the rafters, a raven cawed. Davos did not look away from his king. He could not. If he looked aside, his courage might go with his gaze. "You abandoned me," Stannis said. There was no heat in it, which somehow cut deeper. "You fled Blackwater rather than die for your king." "I did not flee," Davos said, "because some truths could not go unspoken, even if they earned him the pyre. Your grace, the sea took me. If it had been my choice, I'd have died on the Fury with Mathos." He saw something flicker in Stannis's eyes, there and gone. Grief recognized grief. Then the king's jaw tightened again. "There is more than one way to die for a king," Stannis said. "There is also more than one way to live for him. Why did you come back?" "Because you are my king," Davos said simply. "Because there is no other I'd bend the knee to, and because I have words you need to hear." He glanced at Melisandre then, unable to help himself. "Words you will not hear from others." Melisandre's lips curved faintly. "You have always been bold, Onion Knight," she said, "even when you tremble inside." "I tremble for my son," Davos said through his teeth, "for the men who burned, for what we did to win them a tide of wildfire. And I tremble for the path you set his grace upon." Celis gasped, outrage sharp. "You dare!" Stannis held up a hand. She fell silent, though the pulse jumped in her throat. "Say what you came to say," Stannis told Davos. "Be quick. I have little patience left for sermons." "It's no sermon, your grace," Davos said. His fingers flexed at his sides. "It's a letter." He fumbled in his sleeve and drew out the salt-stained scrap of parchment that had come aboard Salador's cog from a trader out of Eastwatch. It had taken bribes and favors to get it into his hands. A battered thing passed from black-cloaked man to merchant to smuggler. The wax of its broken seal still clung in red crumbs. "I had it from a black brother at the port," Davos said. "From Eastwatch by the sea." He said copies had gone to every lord who would listen, and most who would not. "It is from the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, or what's left of them." Stannis's eyes narrowed. "The wall," he said. He shot a brief glance at Melisandre, then back. "Read." Davos unfolded the parchment with care. The ink was run in places, but the words were still clear enough. "To all the kings and lords of Westeros, from Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the Dead Walk, I write these words in haste, for the things I have seen beyond the wall will not wait for slow courtesies." The hall seemed to shrink around them as Davos's rough voice carried the letter's desperate lines. Of whites that rose with blue eyes in the night, of rangers who did not return, of white shadows that moved with the silent grace of hunting cats and the cold of deepest winter, of a king among them, a thing of ice and hatred on a dead horse. Celis' face went pale. The queen's men muttered, hands tightening on their sword hilts as if they could fend off stories with steel. Stannis did not move. His face might have been carved from the same stone as the castle, but Davos saw his jaw clench at certain words, saw his fingers tighten on the arm of his chair when Mormont begged for aid in the name of all the realm, for men and steel and fire, before it was too late. "And if they break the wall, no castle or city in your lands will stand." Davos read. "Men talk of kings, but there will be no kings in a land of ice and corpses. I beg you, in the name of the seven, the old gods, or any gods you hold dear, send help. Or, when the dead come south, blame yourself." Silence fell like a shroud as Davos's voice faded. He let the letter lower to his side. His heart hammered in his chest. He looked up at his king. "Begging your pardon, your grace," he said. "But I think you ought to hear him." Stannis's gaze flicked to Melisandre. "The letter says the dead walk," he said. "The fire shows shadows in the snow. Both point north. The Lord of Light puts many candles along a road. Melisandre said. "The wise man follows the brightest. The wall burns brighter in the flames than any throne of swords." Davos frowned. "You'd send his grace chasing ghosts while the Lannisters sit King Robert's chair?" he demanded. "What of his right?" "His right will be ashes if the world freezes," Melisandre said coolly. "Did you not hear the words you spoke? Onion Knight? No kings in a land of ice and corpses." "They are stories," Davos said, though his own voice lacked conviction now. "Old tales. I've heard sailors talk of dead things in the water, too. They see one whale bone and swear the sea is full of monsters." "The Night's Watch is many things," Stannis said slowly. "Fools among them, but they do not jest about their dead." He looked back to the painted table, where the thin line of the wall divided a carved world. His shoulders seemed to grow heavier as Davos watched. "I have too few men as it is," he said. "My fleet is broken, my cause mocked. Every man I send north is one I cannot send against the usurpers." Yet, Davos took a breath. "Your Grace," he said, feeling as though he stepped off a cliff. "I have been a smuggler and a knight, and I know little of gods. But I know this much: if those stories are half true, there's no profit in winning a throne atop a kingdom of corpses. You are a hard man, but a just one. You know what it is to mend what others break. Maybe—" he hesitated, then forced it out. "Maybe the realm needs mending somewhere other than King's Landing first." Melisandre's eyes gleamed. "The smuggler sees the path that kings and lords ignored," she murmured. "The Lord of Light truly does use the lowly to humble the proud." Davos glared at her. "I speak as his man," he said. "Not as yours. But our purposes align," she said. "For now." Stannis stood. The movement was abrupt, the chair scraping back. All eyes in the hall snapped to him. "Leave us," he commanded. The Queen's men hesitated, glancing at Celis. She gave a tight nod, lips pressed together, and they filed out. Davos remained standing as the hall emptied, his palms slick with sweat. When the great doors closed, only 4 people remained: a king, his queen, his red priestess, and the smuggler who had come back from the sea. Stannis paced a slow circle around the painted table, eyes on the ridges and valleys of his carved kingdom. His hand brushed the north, then the neck, then the jagged scratch that marked King's Landing. "You say I am your king, Davos," he said without looking up. "If I told you we would sail not for King's Landing but for the end of the world, would you still follow?" Davos swallowed. The words of the letter echoed in his mind, the vision he did not want to admit he'd seen in his dreams. The pale, cold eyes, the wall looming. "I would," he said, if you think it needful. You are a better judge of that than I'll ever be." Stannis stopped at the head of the table. He looked up, and in his eyes Davos saw something new, a weight heavier than any crown. "The North will not welcome me," Stannis said. "They want their Starks. They remember my siege of their liege lord's castle. They remember I did not come to Robert's banners when Eddard Stark called." "Then give them a Stark," Melisandre murmured from his side. "Raise one from bastardy and broken vows. The fire shows his face as clearly as it shows yours upon the wall." Davos frowned, but Stannis's gaze had already turned northward on the map. "The boy at the wall," he said slowly. "Eddard's get. Jon Snow." His mouth twisted, as if tasting an unexpected bitterness. Or perhaps, Davos thought, an unexpected hope. Far to the north, where the world narrowed to ice and stone and sky, Jon Snow watched the darkness beyond the wall and listened for sounds that did not belong. The wind was a constant companion, threading icy fingers through his hair, tugging at his black cloak. It howled down from the haunted forest, carrying the creak of trees and the occasional distant crack of ice. Ghost stood beside him, as he so often did, white fur ruffled, red eyes fixed on the same horizon. The direwolf's breath steamed in the cold air. Below, Castle Black slept fitfully. A few lanterns still burned in windows. Somewhere, a man coughed. Somewhere else, another snored. The watch had been thin for years, and thinner still now, with men sent ranging and not returning. The wall felt emptier than Jon liked. He wrapped gloved hands more tightly around Longclaw's pommel and tried not to think of the wildlings still massed on the far side. Mance Rayder was no fool, and the king beyond the wall would not waste his strength in piecemeal raids. He was waiting for what Jon did not know. "You smell it too," Jon murmured to Ghost. "Don't you?" Ghost's ears pricked. He did not look at Jon. His gaze remained fixed on the forest, where no torchlight flickered, no campfire betrayed a human presence. Only shadows, only snow. Jon had learned to trust the direwolf's instincts more than his own. Ghost had scented whites before any of them, had saved Jon's life more times than Jon cared to count. "You remember what the old bear said?" Jon went on, the words forming small clouds in the frigid air. "The dead walk, and what's dead may never die. We sent the crows. We sent the letters. How many kings care that the world ends at their feet? None," a bitter voice in him said. "Robb had his war. Stannis had his claim. Joffrey his cruelty. They were all too busy playing at crowns to look north and see the knife at all their throats." Once, Jon had dreamed of answers from the south, of riders thundering up the King's Road, banners streaming, bringing steel and fire to stand with black against blue. The dream had died by degrees in the long, cold months after Mormont's last letter flew south. Still, sometimes he let himself look at the sky and imagine the faint glow on the horizon was more than moonlight on snow. Tonight, the sky was clear. Stars pricked the dark like pinholes in a black cloak. The moon hung low and thin, a shard of ice caught between clouds. Jon's breath felt heavy in his chest. The scrape of boots on stone broke his reverie. He turned to see dolorous Ed Tollett trudging along the walkway, shoulders hunched, cloak pulled tight. "Lord Snow," Ed said, nodding. "Enjoying the view?" "I'm listening," Jon said. "The forest feels wrong." "It's a forest," Ed said. "They're all wrong. Trees plotting with the snow, snow plotting with the wind. You know how it is." Despite himself, Jon's mouth twitched. "Have you seen Sam? Snoring loud enough to wake the dead," Ed said. "Which is the last thing we need. If I were the dead, I'd want a bit of peace and quiet. Been a while since they slept, I hear." Jon glanced out at the dark again. "Sometimes I think I hear them," he admitted. "The whites, the others, like something creaking in the cold. Maybe it's just my head." "If it's in your head, it's in mine too," Ed said gloomily. "Had a dream last night that a dead horse knocked on my door and asked to borrow a saddle. I told him we didn't have any horse-sized coffins, and he got offended." Jon snorted. The sound was brief, half-choked, but it steadied him. "We need men," he said. "Real men with steel and training. Not boys from Flea Bottom and old men clinging to their last winter. The old bear was right to send those letters. I just wish," he trailed off. "Wishing was for children in Winterfell's Godswood." He shrugged. "Kings don't care what happens at the end of the world," he said. "Not until the end is standing in their bedchambers, asking for a warm place to lie down." "Maybe," Jon said. "Maybe not." He thought of Robb again, of the brother who had gone south a king, banners streaming. He wondered if Robb ever thought of the wall now, or if the war in the Riverlands had swallowed him whole, duty and all. A raven's caw split the night, sharp and sudden. Jon looked up. One of the black birds flapped along the wall, then dropped onto a post beside him. Feathers puffed against the cold. A scrap of parchment was tied to its leg. "Another from Eastwatch?" it said. "Or did someone finally write to tell us we can all go home?" Jon reached out and stroked the raven's head before untying the parchment. The bird pecked at his glove, then croaked, "King, king, king." "Not likely," Jon muttered, smoothing the parchment with his fingers. The wax of the broken seal bore a faint impression he did not recognize. Not Mormont's, not Maester Aemon's. He frowned and read. The words were few, written in a precise, hard hand that spoke of discipline and impatience. "To the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," Jon read softly. Stannis Baratheon, rightful king of Westeros by law and birth, has heard your plea. He sails north with what strength remains to him, to stand at the wall against the darkness that threatens all men. Prepare to receive your king. Jon's heart stumbled in his chest. For a moment he could not feel the cold. Ed, he said, his voice oddly distant in his own ears. Read this. Ed took the parchment, lips moving as he traced the lines. His brows rose slowly. Well, he said at last, either I'm dreaming, or a king just decided the end of the world is worth a visit after all. Jon turned back to the forest. The darkness there did not look any less deep. The dead, if they walked, did not walk slower for news written on thin parchment. But something in him straightened, as if a long-bent reed had finally found a hand to lift it. Tell Maester Aemon, Jon said, and the Lord Commander. Tell them help is coming. He did not know what sort of man Stannis Baratheon was, beyond whispers and tales. He knew only that the South had heard them at last, and was answering with ships and steel instead of silence. The wind scraped at his face. He looked into the dark and imagined he could almost see sails cutting across a phantom sea, bearing a stern-faced king who had chosen a narrow, frozen wall over a shining sword throne. Ghost's ears twitched. The dire wolf pressed against Jon's leg, warmth a small, fierce comfort in the cold. We'll be ready, Jon murmured, for the dead and the living both. Dragonstone's armory had never been so quiet in the midst of such movement. Men hammered rivets, sharpened swords on whetstones, and strapped mail shirts onto wooden stands. Yet the usual banter and curses were muted. Orders passed in low voices, the scrape of steel on stone, the thud of packed chests, and the clink of chain filled the air like a strange music. Stannis walked the length of the room, eyes cataloging every helm, every spear, every bundle of arrows. He saw the numbers in his mind the way other men saw colors. How many knights of the Queen's men, how many sellswords still owed him fealty, how many ships remained seaworthy after Blackwater's ruin. Every tally came up short. Every measure of strength against the task before them felt wanting. A few hundred knights, he said under his breath. 1,000, maybe, if those curs from the Stormlands remember their oaths. 2,000 men-at-arms, if we scrape every cell and hall. A quarter of the strength I had before the bay. Quality over quantity, your grace, Davos said quietly beside him. He wore a plain brown doublet, the sort a steward might have, but there was a steadiness in him that needed no fine cloth. Men who follow you north for duty will stand longer than those who chased gold to King's Landing. Duty does not stop a dead man's axe, Stannis said, or a cold thing with eyes of blue. Davos's mouth thinned. No, he agreed. But better a small shield held firm than a big one dropped at the first blow. Melisandre moved like a red flame between racks of mail. Men avoided her gaze, some with open fear, others with the wary disdain of those who trusted steel over spells. She seemed not to notice. Her fingers brushed the edges of swords, the curve of a helm, as if she were blessing them. The Lord of Light does not despise small numbers, she said. He once thinned an army to 300 to show his power. Numbers are a shadow, purpose is flame. I will remember that when 100 dead fall on each of my 300, Stannis said dryly. I have no intention of sacrificing men just to prove a god's cleverness. She smiled faintly. You cannot win this war by steel alone, but steel you will need, and hearts that do not break. You will find both in the north, if you give them reason. Stannis stopped near a chest of folded banners. His hand brushed the topmost one, feeling the embroidered stag beneath his fingers. The North remembers, he said grimly. What it remembers best is Stark, not Baratheon. Then you must tie your fate to Stark, Melisandre said. Her gaze was intent, almost fevered. The boy at the wall, Jon Snow. In the flames he stands beside you again and again. Not just as a sword, but as something more, a banner of his own, a wolf's head crowned in snow. A bastard, Stannis said. Ned Stark's byblow. I have never had patience for such. Even my brothers. A name is a garment, Melisandre said. It can be changed. A river does not cease to be water because men call it by another word downstream. Stannis scowled, but Davos saw the calculation working behind his eyes. It was a familiar expression, one he had watched over ledgers and maps for years. The North will not kneel easily, Davos said carefully. They've crowned Robb by all accounts, though the gods know if the boy still lives. They've bled for him. They'll not take a southern king on their backs without some assurance. Assurance, Stannis repeated. I saved Storm's End. I held the line at Dragonstone. I have bled more for this realm than all those perfumed Lannisters put together, and it still is not enough. It isn't about what is enough, Davos said. It's about what's needed. The North needs a Stark, Trueborn or named so, to rally behind. The Wall needs men. And you, he hesitated, then plunged on. You need the North, if you're to stand against what's coming. Needs must, your grace. Stannis's mouth twisted. You would have me hand a crown to some boy who swore himself to celibacy and winters on a grim wall of ice, he said. A bastard raised in black. I'd have you save the realm first, Davos said. Crowns can wait, so can thrones. The dead, from what I hear, don't wait long. Melisandre's ruby pulsed faintly. You do not lose your crown by setting another upon a smaller head, she said. The boy will be your sword in the North, your banner, not your rival. If he sits in any hall, it will be by your sufferance. And if the North decides it likes its own king better than the one who comes with fire and strange gods, Stannis asked, then you will remind them who lit the beacons when the night came, she said simply. You will be the king who chose them over gold chairs and southern feasts. They will remember that more than any name. Stannis looked down at his hand on the banner chest. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the Baratheon Stag standard aside. Beneath it lay other folded cloths, remnants from earlier years, Storm's End colors, Dragonstone's own ancient devices. He pushed them aside too. What would a Stark banner look like? He asked, voice low. If it were to fly beside mine, Davos imagined it. A gray direwolf on white, snapping in a northern wind, and beside it the crowned stag of Baratheon. For a moment, he saw them not as separate beasts, but as halves of something larger, joined by necessity. Cold and hard, he said, but loyal if you treat it fair. Stannis let the banner chest close with a soft thud. Send the orders, he told Davos. Every ship we have must be readied. We sail for the Wall as soon as wind and tide allow. Davos's throat tightened. Aye, your grace. And draft a letter, Stannis went on, to Jeor Mormont at the Wall and to this Jon Snow. Tell them their king comes north, not as a beggar, nor as a conqueror, but as a man who remembers his duty to the realm. They will remember that. Melisandre's eyes shone. You choose the path of fire, she said, not the green, fire of man's vanity, but the pure flame of purpose. The Lord of Light smiles on this. Stannis snorted softly. If he does, he can show it by giving me a wind that does not reek of rot. He turned away, barking commands to the knights and captains in the armory. Men straightened as he passed, spines stiffening. Whatever else Blackwater had burned, it had not touched his presence. He was still a king with or without a throne. Davos watched him go, then looked back at the half-open chest of banners. For the first time since the bay boiled green, he felt a line, however faint, between despair and purpose. The ships would sail north. He would be on them come storm or calm. And at the end of that long, cold voyage, a wall of ice waited, with a boy in black who might, if the gods were inclined to mercy, be more open to reason than kings in the south. The castle storms beat against Dragonstone that night as if the island had offended the sky. Rain lashed the arrow slits. Thunder rolled across the sea and hammered on the stone. Somewhere, a shutter banged, and men cursed as they fought to secure it. In Shireen's little chamber, the storm was only a murmur beyond thick walls. A single candle burned on the table, its wax pooled around the base like spilled cream. Beside it, propped open on a stand, lay a book nearly as big as the girl herself. The lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. Her thin finger traced the words slowly, lips moving. Torrhen Stark called the king who knelt, she whispered, eyes squinting a little. He had 3 sons whose names were Brandon, Walton, and... Her finger slid back. Brandon, Walton, and Rickon. Brandon had no issue. Walton died in service to King Aegon, and Rickon had sons of his own, from whom the later lords of Winterfell descend. The door opened behind her with a soft creak. Shireen looked up, startled. For a moment she expected her mother, with her sharp tongue and talk of visions and sin. But it was her father who stood framed in the doorway, cloak damp at the hem, jaw set. "Father," she said, surprise brightening her tired eyes. "I didn't hear you knock." "I did not knock," Stannis said. His voice, so often harsh in the hall, sounded oddly subdued here. "You were reading." "Yes." Shireen shifted on her stool, smoothing her skirts. "About the Starks. Maester Pylus says it's important to know the old kings, even if they don't wear crowns anymore." "The Starks still wear crowns," Stannis said. "Of a sort." Shireen frowned, confused. "But King Joffrey is no true king," Stannis said curtly. He caught himself, then drew a breath. The lines around his mouth eased a fraction. "That is not for you to trouble yourself with. What have you read of them, the Starks?" "That they're loyal," Shireen said promptly, "and stubborn, and that they held the North from Winterfell for thousands of years. Before even the Targaryens came. They kept the wall, too, when the Night's Watch was strong." She looked down at the page. "There was a king in the North named Jon once. Jon Stark. He fought, I forget who. I could find it again." "It doesn't matter," Stannis said, though his gaze flicked to the book as if he might wrest the knowledge out of the parchment himself. "What matters is that they kept their oaths. When they bent the knee, they meant it." He hesitated. "Did the book say anything of bastards?" Shireen blinked. "Bastards?" She thought for a moment. "Only that they're given the surname Snow in the north, or Sand in Dorne, or Rivers in the Riverlands. I like Snow best." She smiled faintly. "It sounds clean and cold, like something sharp, but pretty." Her father's expression tightened. Shireen's smile faltered. "Have I said something wrong?" She asked quickly. "No," he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The candlelight threw soft shadows on the grayscale-scarred side of Shireen's face, blurring the hard lines of the disease into something almost gentle. "You've said nothing wrong." He did not often come to her alone. When he did, he felt like an intruder in a world of ink and parchment and childish hopes he had long ago discarded for himself. "You will be sailing soon," he said. "With your mother and the Red Woman. South, most likely to some place less cursed by wind. I have not yet decided where." Her small shoulders stiffened. "Without you, I go north," he said, "to the Wall, to fight a war that most of this realm believes is a tale from a nurse." "The cold things," Shireen said quietly. "The ones from the stories old Nan used to tell. I read about them. Maester Pylus says they're only legends. But..." She bit her lip. "But the way everyone talks lately, is it true?" He thought of the flames licking higher in Melisandre's hearth, of the vision of the wall shuddering, of the letter from Jeor Mormont, words pressed onto parchment by a hand that had seen too much. "It is true enough that I must go," he said. "True enough that men will die if I do not. Perhaps if I do." Her eyes grew wide, glistening. "You'll come back," she said. It was not a question. Children's words seldom were. "I will do my duty," he said, which was as close to a promise as he dared. "That is all a man can swear." Shireen looked down at her hands. Thin fingers, the nails bitten. "Mother says the Lord of Light chose you," she said, "to burn away the darkness. She says you'll be king of everything, even the North." "Your mother puts too much stock in fire," Stannis said. Kings are not chosen by flames in a hearth. They are made by law, and by whether men will follow them. Will the North follow you? She asked. If it has any sense, he said, or any memory, it will remember that when the dead came, I went to meet them. Shireen nodded slowly. Her gaze went to the book again. They remembered the king who knelt, she said. Torrin, the one who gave up his crown so his people wouldn't burn. She hesitated, then looked up, cheeks flushing as if she had overstepped. Maybe they will remember the king who went north, too. Her words hung between them, simple and earnest and heavier than any title. Stannis studied her small, scarred face. There was a fierce little courage in her that surprised him sometimes, a stubbornness that was not unlike his own. The gods had given him a child as fragile as a bird, with a face half turned to stone, and still she looked at the world as if it might be mended. That would be a foolish name, he said brusquely. Too long. Shireen smiled. A crooked thing. Then you can think of a better one. He almost smiled back. Almost. Read your histories, he said instead. Remember the names. Kings are soon dust, but what they did matters for longer than their bones. If I do not return, you will remember for me. Her eyes shone. I will, she whispered. He turned before she could see more than the stiff set of his shoulders. At the door, he paused. And Shireen, he said without looking back, when you hear others speak of this, of my going north, you may hear talk of sacrifice, of burning. You are not to heed it. Do you understand? I don't. You are my daughter, he said. My heir. No god worth the worship of a man would ask what some might suggest. If any do, remember that your father forbade it. My word is law even over gods. There. He had said it aloud to someone other than his own reflection. The candle flame guttered in a draft. Shireen's voice was barely audible. Yes, father. Good. He opened the door. Sleep. Storm or no, there will be much to do come morning. He stepped back into the corridor, where the wind's howl was louder. For a man who believed little in omens, he found a grim satisfaction in defying the one he feared most. Melisandre might call fire holy, but he would be damned before he fed it his child. If the Lord of Light wanted a sacrifice, Stannis Baratheon would find another way to pay the price. The morning they sailed, the sky was the color of old iron. Clouds hung low over Dragonstone, heavy and sullen. The sea slapped at the black hulls of the ships with a lazy swell, as if unimpressed by this second attempt at war. Men moved about the decks with the brisk, tense quiet of those who knew too well how sailcloth could become shroud. Ropes creaked. The sharp tang of tar and salt filled the air. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries thin and mocking. Stannis stood at the prow of his flagship, gloved hands clasped behind his back. The wind plucked at his cloak, snapping the Stag banner above his head. He did not look back at Dragonstone's twisted towers, though the island loomed behind them like a crouching beast, watching its master leave. Davos stood a pace behind, one hand on the rail. His burned skin tugged in the chill, but he barely felt it. He watched the line of ships stretching out behind them, some larger, some patched and weathered, but all bearing men who had chosen to follow their king north into cold and uncertainty. Fewer masts than the last time, Davos said quietly. Stannis did not turn. Better men this time, he said. Those who feared death have already found it. Davos thought of Mathos, of the men who had cried out for fathers and gods as green fire swallowed them. Some who feared it died anyway, he said. That is the way of fear, Stannis said. It keeps no promises. The shore slipped away behind them, the dark stone of Dragonstone's harbor growing smaller. On the quays, a thin scattering of figures watched: servants, castle guards, a few merchants still owed coin. Somewhere among them, Shireen stood with Maester Pylus and a cluster of septons and red-robed priests. Celis had refused to come down, saying she would pray above instead, closer to the Lord of Light, or farther from the salt, Davos thought. The island's profile shrank as the ships gained open water. Ahead, The horizon stretched empty and gray. "North," Stannis said, as if the word were a vow. "To the wall." "Aye, your grace," Davos said. He remembered another departure, months before, under a bright, cruel sun. The men had cheered then, laughing, full of certainty. They had spoken of how they'd drink in the Red Keep when the usurpers were cast down. Their ships had cut the water like swords, sails full and proud. The sea had seemed almost friendly. This time there were no cheers. Laughter came in short, nervous bursts, quickly shushed. Men checked and rechecked knots, the ties on their armor, the edges of their blades. They had seen what wildfire did. They had smelled burned flesh. The sea had taught them humility. Davos took a deep breath of sharp air and let it out slowly. "We'll reach the narrow sea by nightfall if the wind holds," he said. "From there are longer legs." "I know the route," Stannis said. "You are not the only man to have sailed north of Eastwatch. But perhaps the only one to return twice," Davos said, attempting levity. Fell flat between them. Stannis's gaze flicked sideways. "Do you fear this voyage?" he asked. "I fear every voyage," Davos said honestly. "Sea and sky have minds of their own. But I fear what waits if we do nothing more." Stannis nodded, once. "Then we are of one mind," he said. "Remember that when the nights grow too long and the cold bites." Melisandre stood farther back on the deck, close to the mainmast, robes too thin for the weather yet seemingly untouched by it. The sailors gave her a wide berth, muttering when they thought she couldn't hear. Her eyes were on the horizon, where the gray sea met gray sky in a seamless band. She had wanted to see them off with a fire on the shore, something to mark their departure in flame. Stannis had refused, curtly. "The last time you lit a great fire for me," he'd said, "it was in Blackwater Bay." "You still live," she'd replied. "And the men who burned?" he'd demanded. "We cannot count the cost by men alone," she had said. "We must count what was achieved." "Nothing was achieved," he'd snarled. "We were beaten." Her smile had been small and infuriating. "Not all purposes are seen in a single battle, your grace." Now, as the fleet cut northward, Davos watched her watching the horizon. The ruby at her throat glowed faintly, pulsing in time with some inner rhythm. "You think the wind is yours," he said under his breath, more to himself than to her. "But wind and sea have their own gods, or no gods at all." As if in answer, the breeze stiffened. The sails billowed fuller. The flagship surged forward, cutting a foamy wake. Stannis's jaw tightened. "If the Lord of Light wants to take credit for a favorable wind, I will not argue," he said. "He owes me a few." Davos allowed himself a rare smile. "Aye," he said, "let him pay some of his debts." Behind them, Dragonstone dwindled until it was only a blur on the southern horizon. Then nothing at all. Ahead lay cold waters, the narrow seas, and beyond them the chill teeth of the North's coasts. Somewhere beyond that, an immense wall of ice waited, holding back horrors that had stirred now and would not sleep again. Davos gripped the rail. He had smuggled onions, contraband, and hope into starving castles. He had run from storm and pirate and royal taxman alike. He had never before sailed toward something he hated so little and feared so much. "Do you miss it?" he asked suddenly. Stannis did not pretend not to understand. "The throne," he said. "I have never had it to miss." "The fight for it, then," Davos said. "The idea of it. Riding south to set the realm to rights." Stannis stared ahead, eyes narrowed against the spray. "I miss justice," he said at last. "From which thrones are supposed to flow. But how can the realm be set to rights when the very ground under our feet threatens to turn to ice and darkness?" He shook his head. "First I will mend what lies at the edge. Then we will see what remains to fix in the middle." Avuz nodded slowly. "One patch at a time," he said. "Like a sail." "Yes," Stannis said, "like a sail. And if the cloth is too rotted, you cut it away and sew new. We shall see, in the north, how much of this kingdom can still hold wind." The fleet sailed on into waters that grew steadily colder. Gulls gave way to silent, watchful shapes in the waves. The men tightened their cloaks and told each other stories of the wall. That it was haunted, that it sang in the wind, that giants lived in its shadow. Davos listened, said little, and watched his king. Whatever waited at the end of this voyage, the choice had been made. Stannis Baratheon had turned his back on the Iron Throne and set his prow toward a wall of ice and a darkness older than any king. If the realm forgot that in years to come, Davos vowed he would not. Eastwatch by the sea looked less like a castle and more like a wound at the end of the world. Ice-crusted walls hunched against a gray sky, their stones slick with frozen spray. The harbor was a half-filled bowl of slush and dark water, ice floes grinding together with low, painful groans as the tide muttered beneath them. Stannis' flagship slid into the bay under shortened sail, their progress careful and halting. Men with poles leaned over the sides to push at the ice, cursing softly as chunks scraped and bumped along the hull. The cold gnawed at every exposed bit of skin like a living thing. Davos stood near the prow, breath clouding before him, eyes on the black-cloaked figures gathered along the dock. They looked thinner than he'd expected, road-worn even here at the end of all roads. Some were old, their beards frosted white. Others were boys, faces still soft beneath the grime and stubble. All watched the approaching fleet with a wary, measuring gaze. And there, near the front, a man closer to boy than to old in truth, but with something in his bearing that caught Davos's attention. He wore black like the rest, a heavy cloak rimmed with rough fur, but he stood a little straighter, as if the wind had not yet learned how to bend him. A sword hilt shaped like a wolf's head jutted over his shoulder. Beside him prowled a white direwolf, its fur a stark shock against the dark docks, eyes burning red as coals. "Jon Snow," Davos murmured. "Has to be." The ship bumped gently against the dock. Ropes were thrown and caught, mooring them to the frozen beams. Gangplanks thudded into place, dusting snow loose from their edges. Stannis descended first, boots striking the wood with a solid thump. The chill bit deeper as the wind off the sea seized their cloaks. The king eyed the assembled black brothers with his typical uncompromising scrutiny. "Which of you is Jeor Mormont?" he said without preamble. A murmur ran through the men. The young man with the wolf stepped forward. "Lord Commander Mormont is dead, your grace," he said, the title falling from his lips as if it had cost him something but he'd chosen to pay anyway. He fell on the march back from the fist of the first men. Stannis studied him. "Then who commands here?" he demanded. The young man hesitated, just a heartbeat. "Ser Alliser Thorne holds Eastwatch for now," he said. "But at Castle Black," he seemed to steel himself. "At Castle Black, the Watch will elect a new Lord Commander soon. For the moment, I speak for the men of the Ranging. I am Jon Snow." His breath steamed in the air. His eyes, dark gray, met Stannis's and did not drop. "Ned Stark's bastard," Stannis said. There was no kindness in the words, but there was no particular contempt either. It was a statement, like noting snow on the ground or ice in the harbor. Jon's jaw tightened. "Eddard Stark was my father, yes," he said. "But my brothers are the Night's Watch now. And yet it was his blood that answered," Melisandre murmured behind Stannis. Her red eyes rested on Jon with an intensity that made the young man's hand shift subtly closer to his sword hilt. Ghost growled, low in warning. Davos stepped forward, raising both hands, palms open. "We've come to stand with you, Lord Snow," he said. "Not against you." The letter you sent south, Jeor Mormont's letter, was read by my king. He chose to answer. Jon's gaze flicked to Davos, then back to Stannis. "Many letters were sent," he said. "Few were answered, fewer by kings." "I am not many kings," Stannis said. "I am the king." The words could have sounded like arrogance. Here, at the world's frozen edge, they sounded more like stubborn fact. Jon studied him anew, as if recalibrating some inner measure. "Kings don't usually come to the end of the world," Jon said evenly. "They send men instead. A king who sends men to freeze while he warms his arse in a castle is no kind of king, Stannis said. I have come because the realm needs mending, and the worst tear is here. Behind Jon, some of the brothers shifted, exchanging glances. This was not the sort of talk they'd expected from a man in a crown, Davos guessed. You will find a welcome of sorts at Castle Black, Jon said after a moment. Though it may be a hard one, the Watch has its ways, and we remember what happened the last time a king came north with fire. The Targaryens burned as much as they bent, Stannis said. I will do neither without cause. Jon glanced at the ships crowding the harbor. You've brought men, he said. We need men, and steel, and law, Stannis said, which you will find I bring in equal measure. I will speak to your assembled officers when we reach Castle Black. We have much to decide. Jon nodded slowly. Snow swirled between them, fine and sharp as ground glass. For now, Jon said, you're welcome at Eastwatch as guests of the Night's Watch. We have little to offer but thin ale and thinner stew. Honest fare, Stannis said. Better than lies served on golden plates. He moved past Jon, boots crunching on frost, his retinue falling in behind him. Melisandre's ruby glowed in the gray light, an unwelcome ember. The Queen's men followed, eyes suspicious of the Black brothers' ragged discipline. Davos lingered a moment longer, turning back to Jon. Up close, the young man's face bore traces of boyhood, a certain slenderness to the jaw, a softness at the corners of the mouth, but his eyes were older than they should have been. Ser Davos Seaworth, Davos said, extending a scarred hand. Hand to King Stannis, or what passes for one these days. Jon took it, his grip firm despite the cold. Jon Snow, he said, steward to the Lord Commander. For now. Ghost sniffed at Davos, huffed, and turned his attention back to the ships. I've heard of you, Jon added quietly. The Onion Knight. More onions than night, if truth be told, Davos said. But I've been known to carry things where they're needed. Deaded toward the wall, towering in the distance, pale and immense. His grace means to carry his war there, with you, against what comes. Jon's gaze went to the wall, and something like relief, quickly hidden, flickered across his features. We'll need every hand we can get, he said. If half of what we've seen out there comes south. He trailed off. For a moment, he looked not like a steward or a bastard, but like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, listening to the roar of something far below that he could not yet see. Then let's not wait to find out, Davos said. We've spent enough time watching other men's wars. Time to fight one that matters. Jon's mouth twitched in something like agreement. Come, he said. We'll warm you as best we can. The wall's cold, but the hearths still burn. For now. Together, they followed in Stannis' wake, toward a castle that was more scars and smoke than stone, and beyond it, to an ice wall that divided the known world from whatever lay in the frozen dark. The first time Stannis Baratheon stood atop the wall, he understood why even kings spoke of it with a kind of grudging awe. The ice stretched out beneath his boots in a sheer drop of 700 feet, blue-white and faintly luminous in the fading light. The parapet was narrow, the snow packed down by countless boots into a treacherous, uneven crust. The wind struck like a mailed fist, carrying with it the clean, savage scent of snow and pine and something older. Beyond, the world dropped away into a vast expanse of white and shadow. The haunted forest spread like a dark, tangled sea, its branches clawing at the sky. Snowfields glittered where the last light of the sun caught them, already fading to bruised purple. The horizon was a line between earth and sky that felt less like distance and more like a border between known and unknown. Jon Snow stood at the edge, hands resting lightly on the hilt of Longclaw, cloak snapping. Ghost was not with him this time. The direwolf had balked at the cage that raised them to the top, pacing below with hackles up. The lift had groaned and swayed as it climbed, the men within shifting uneasily. Heights bothered Davos. He had admitted as much, gripping the rope with white knuckles. Stannis had said nothing, though his stomach had lurched more than once as the ground fell away. Now, with the wind tearing at his cloak and the realm spread beneath his eyes, Stannis felt something unexpected curl in his chest. Not fear, he had stared down worse. Something like purpose, sharp and cutting. "This is your kingdom," he said to Jon, the words surprising even himself. Jon glanced at him, startled. "My kingdom, your grace? You know it," Stannis said. "You've walked its ice, fought its shadows. You know more of it than any man in silk south of the neck. That makes it yours, in truth if not in title." Jon looked back out over the forest. "It's not a kingdom I asked for," he said, "or one many men would want. Few men ask for any crown worth wearing," Stannis said. "They come with duties men would sooner flee. The realm needs men who take them up anyway." Jon's mouth twisted. "You speak as if you mean to set one on my head," he said. "A crown of snow." Stannis studied him. The boy, that stubborn part of him still tried to call Jon a boy, had gray eyes that had seen too much. The set of his shoulders spoke of burdens carried longer than his years. There was Stark in him, certainly, a certain plain, unadorned steadiness, but something else too, a quiet heat under the snow. "I mean to offer you a choice," Stannis said, "one the gods rarely give. You can stay as you are, a bastard and a brother of the Watch, bound to die on this wall. Or you can be more." Jon stiffened. "My vows are words," Stannis cut in. "And words can be unbound when circumstances change. The Night's Watch was sworn to guard the realms of men. Tell me, Snow, how well can they guard if the kings they guarded for have forgotten them? If there are no realms left to protect?" Jon was silent for a long moment. The wind filled the space between them, howling against the ice. "I took those vows seriously," Jon said at last. "I still do. They're the only thing that makes us more than a band of outlaws in black. And if the letter of them keeps you from doing what their spirit demands," Stannis pressed, "the wall needs men who can lead more than it needs rules followed to the death." Jon turned fully to face him. "What are you asking me, your grace?" Stannis drew a breath that stung his lungs. "I am asking you," he said, "if I were to set aside your bastardy and name you Jon Stark, would you take up the mantle? Would you bear the crown of the North and use it as a shield for the realm, rather than a bauble for yourself?" The words hung in the freezing air, heavy as stones. Jon stared at him, color draining from his face. For a heartbeat, he looked very young. Stark features or no, he was still the boy who had stood in Winterfell's yard, watching his trueborn siblings be fitted for lives he could never touch. "You would," he swallowed, throat working, "you would make me a Stark, king in the North?" "I would," Stannis said, "by law and royal decree. Your father's blood runs in you, bastard or not. The North loves the name Stark. It will follow one, where it would spit at any other southern king. If I am to stand against what comes from beyond that..." He jerked his chin toward the forest. "I need the North united. I need its wolves running in one pack, not snapping at each other's throats." Jon's eyes dropped to the wall beneath their feet. His gloved hand tightened on Longclaw's pommel. "You ask me to break my vows," he said quietly, "to abandon my brothers, to turn my back on the Watch when the thing we swore to fight is nearly upon us. I ask you to honor them in another way," Stannis said. "What good is a vow if clinging to it means letting the world fall? If you take the North, if you unite its lords and its wildlings, every man who rides at your word will be a stone in this wall. In time, you will give more to the Watch than you ever gave with sword alone." Jon's laugh was bitter and brief. "And my brothers? The men who stood beside me on the fist, who watched the dead rise, what will they think? Seeing me in furs and a crown while they freeze on this wall. They will think what men always think when someone is raised above them," Stannis said. "Some will spit, some will cheer, most will endure and follow where they are led. And if you use what I give you to shield them, they will bless your name in time." Jon's gaze went north again. The forest was a dark smear. Somewhere out there, Mance Raider's people shivered. Somewhere beyond them, things that were not men moved through the snow with cold patience. "I dreamed once of being more than a bastard," Jon said, so softly Stannis had to lean closer to hear. "Of having a place that was mine, a name, a seat at my father's tab. Lou, even if it were at the far end." "Dreams are for children," Stannis said. "This is not a dream, Snow. It is an offer. Refuse, and I will find some Karstark or Umber to raise instead. Accept, and you will have a chance to shape what comes." "And what would you have of me if I accept?" Jon asked. "Beyond words about unity." Stannis's eyes hardened. "I would have you bend your knee to me as your king," he said. "I would have you call your banners from White Harbor to Last Hearth, from the Dreadfort to Bear Island. I would have you treat with the wildlings not as enemies to be slaughtered, but as swords that can be turned against a greater threat. I would have you stand beside me when the dead come, not as a nameless crow, but as a wolf whose howl the North cannot ignore." Jon studied him, searching for something. Stannis let him look. There was no art in him to hide what he was. Hard, tired, stubborn beyond reason. "You turned away from the Iron Throne for this," Jon said slowly. "From a crown of swords, for a wall of ice. I turned away from a city of liars and cowards to fight a war that matters," Stannis said. "If the realm survives, there will be thrones enough to argue over. If it does not, they will all be bones in the snow. I will not be remembered as a king who haggled over chairs while the dark swallowed the world." Jon's breath fogged between them. He looked for a long time at his own hands, gloved and calloused, resting on the sword that had once belonged to Lord Jeor Mormont. Then he looked back at Stannis. "If I say no?" he asked. "Then you will die on this wall sooner or later," Stannis said bluntly. "Sword in hand if you are lucky, and I will do what I can without you, though the North will be the weaker for it." Jon's mouth twitched in something like grim amusement. "You don't make it easy, Your Grace." "I do not make anything easy," Stannis said. "That is not my gift." Silence stretched. Below, the world faded into deeper shadow as the sun slipped away. Torches flared along the wall behind them, small pockets of defiance against the dark. At last, Jon Snow closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something in them had settled, like a coin finally coming to rest. "I will not abandon my brothers," he said. "Not if there is any other way. But if the watch can be given men and strength in exchange for one man's vows, if I can do more for them as Jon Stark than as Jon Snow." He drew a sharp breath. "Then I will hear the rest of what you propose, and I will consider it, not for myself, for them, for the North, for the realm." It was not a yes, not yet, but it was not the no Stannis had half expected. "Good," Stannis said. "Think quickly. The dead do not wait for men to decide who they are." He turned away from the edge. His legs felt colder than they had before, as if the ice beneath his boots had seeped into his bones. Davos waited near the lift, cloak drawn tight, face pale. "How does it look?" Davos asked. "Like the end of the world," Stannis said. "And the beginning of my war." They stepped into the creaking cage. As it began to descend, rattling down the side of the wall, Stannis looked up one last time. Jon Snow still stood at the parapet, dark against the fading light, cloak whipping, as if he were already some grim statue carved by future generations to mark a turning. The king who went north had found his ally. The rest would follow in blood and fire and snow. The cell was hardly more than a hole in the wall, cut into the ice and faced with stone. Jon had slept in worse places beyond the wall, but never with his thoughts as restless as they were now. The candle on the table had burned low, its light a wavering halo in the close darkness. Wax had dribbled down its side and hardened in crooked ridges. Ghost snored softly at the foot of the bed, every breath a faint rumble. The direwolf's warmth seeped into Jon's boots, but it did nothing for the chill inside his chest. He had taken off his cloak, but not his sword. Longclaw leaned against the wall within easy reach, the pommel carved in the shape of a snarling wolf's head. The blade had belonged to Jeor Mormont once. The old bear's shade seemed to watch Jon from every shadow, silent and expectant. King in the north. The words would not leave him. They echoed beneath his skull, ringing against his old vows and newer fears. Stannis Baratheon's voice had been hard as the ice underfoot when he'd spoken them. Not coaxing or cajoling, but laying an iron on the table and asking, "Will you pick it up or not?" Jon had dreamed of such things once when he was younger. A seat at his father's table, a name that did not taste of snow and shame. Even now, in the privacy of his own mind, the thought made something ache in him that he had buried deep beneath years of black cloth and cold duty. He rubbed at his eyes with the heels of his hands. The skin there felt raw. "What would you have me do?" he asked the dark quietly. "What is right?" Ghost stirred at the sound of his voice, lifting his head. Red eyes glowed briefly in the candlelight before the wolf laid his muzzle back on his paws. A soft knock came at the door. Before Jon could rise, it creaked open, and Samwell Tarly slipped in sideways, as if afraid he might be shoved back out again. His round face was flushed from the cold, spectacles fogged at the edges. "Jon," Sam whispered. "Are you awake?" "No," Jon said. "I'm talking in my sleep." Sam pushed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing a little hard. "It's freezing in here," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Not that the other cells are much better, but I think you've found the coldest hole in the wall." "It suits me," Jon said. "I need my wits frozen so they stop running in circles." Sam's gaze flicked to the sword, then to Jon's face. "Is it true?" he asked, in a rush. "What they're saying? That King Stannis offered to make you Jon Stark?" Jon's jaw clenched. "Word travels faster than ravens here," he muttered. "It's not. I didn't mean to pry," Sam said quickly. "But Ser Alliser is spitting nails, and Janos Slint keeps muttering about treason and southern kings buying crows like they buy horses. Even PYP heard it, and PYP hears nothing unless it involves stealing extra bread from the kitchens." Jon grimaced. "Stannis didn't whisper," he said. "He might as well have nailed the offer to the lift and sent it up and down all day for everyone to read." Sam took a hesitant step closer. Ghost sniffed the air, decided he approved, and closed his eyes again. "What are you going to do?" Sam asked. Jon stared at the candle. "I swore a vow," he said. "To take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. To wear black for the rest of my days. A crown sits poorly on black cloth. But the watch itself," Sam fumbled for words. "The letter you sent south was for them. For all of us. If you could do more for the wall as a Stark than as a Snow." Stannis said much the same. Jon cut in. "He would unbind my vows with a stroke of his quill, if I let him. But crowns sit on men, not on words alone. What happens to the watch if I become a king? How do I ask my brothers to stand in tatters while I sit in furs?" Sam swallowed. "You wouldn't sit," he said. "Not you. You'd ride with them, fight with them. You'd be a different sort of king." Jon wanted to believe that, but he had seen enough of men to know how crowns changed them. Even Robb, especially Robb. "Robb was a different sort of king too," Jon said softly. "They still put a sword through him and a wolf's head on his shoulders. The North followed him, and where did it lead? A knife's point at a feast." Sam flinched. "We don't know all of it," he said. "Only what the letters say. Still, if the Boltons hold Winterfell now, as Maester Aemon says, then the North is broken. If a Stark doesn't stand up soon, there might not be a North left to save." Jon closed his eyes. He saw Winterfell as it had been in his memory. The towers draped in snow, the gods would pond frozen over, Arya's laughter echoing off stone. He saw it as the letters described it now. Burned, broken, wolves driven out so Flayed men might move in. "I thought coming here would make it easier," he said. "To leave it behind, to be only a crow." "You're not only anything," Sam said, surprising him. "You never were. You're, Jon, you're Ned Stark's son, whether someone wrote it down or not." You're the boy who gave me a chance when no one else would. You're the man who killed a White Walker and brought us back from the Fist. Maybe," he swallowed, "maybe that's what the North needs. That Jon." Jon looked at him. Sam's face was pale, but his eyes were steady behind the fogged glass. In their depths, Jon saw fear and hope and a faith that felt as heavy as any hand on his shoulder. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Jon said. Sam blinked. "You think any of them are?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the wall. "Ser Alliser, Slynt, even Stannis with his crown. They're just men, cold and tired and angry. You're the only one I've seen who keeps asking what's right, even when it hurts." Jon let out a slow breath. The candle flickered, guttered, then flared again. "Tomorrow they choose a new Lord Commander," he said. "Perhaps that's answer enough. If they choose me, then I'll know where my duty lies. And if they don't, then I'll have one less thing to weigh." Jon said grimly. Sam fidgeted. There's something you should know about that," he said. "About the choosing." Jon frowned. "What?" Sam smiled. "A nervous, conspiratorial little thing. That some of us have been talking," he said, "and listening, and counting." The hall at Castle Black had seen too many winters and too few repairs. Smoke from the torches clung stubbornly to the rafters, turning the air thick and bitter. The rushes on the floor were old and damp, and the benches creaked under the weight of men in black. Still, there was a kind of gravity in the room that Jon had never felt before. It clung to the corners and settled in the silence that fell as the last of the brothers filed in. Men who usually filled the space with jests and curses sat straighter, their faces serious. At the high end of the hall, near the cold hearth, 3 rough tables had been set. On each sat a wooden bowl and a stack of smooth river stones, some black, some white, some gray. Behind the tables stood 3 stewards chosen for their honesty and clear hands. "All right," called out Cotter Pike of Eastwatch, his beard bristling with impatience. "We all know why we're here. The Watch needs a Lord Commander, and the Wall won't pick one itself. You know the names. You know the men. Choose wisely, or we'll all live or die by your poor judgment." A ripple of grim amusement ran through the gathered brothers. Ser Alliser Thorne sat near the front, his back straight, his face a mask of cold disdain. Janos Slynt perched at his side, pudgy hands folded over his belly, eyes small and mean. They had gathered their supporters. Hard-faced veterans, a handful of southern recruits who remembered Slynt as a power in King's Landing. Men who preferred cruelty they understood to justice they did not. On the other side of the hall, Dolorous Ed, Gren, and PYP clustered around Sam, who seemed determined to disappear into his cloak. They watched Jon as he entered, their expressions a mix of hope and worry. Jon took his seat among the rest, feeling their gazes like weight on his shoulders. He had never wanted this. He had only wanted to serve. "By tradition," Pike said, raising his voice again, "we vote by stone. Black for Ser Alliser Thorne, white for Cotter Pike." He smirked. "Gray for anyone else you trust not to bugger us all to death." There was a rough chuckle at that, quickly smothered. "And remember," Pike added, "we vote until one man gets more stones than the others. If that takes all day and half the night, so be it. Better tired than dead, I say." Men began to rise, slowly, like waves building. They filed past the tables, each taking a stone and dropping it in the bowl of his choice. Stones clicked and clacked, the sound oddly loud in the hush. Jon watched the line move. Ed shuffled forward, rolling a stone between his fingers. PYP glanced back once, making a face that asked, "Are you seeing this?" Gren looked solemn as a septon. Sam went last among them, palms slick with sweat. Jon saw him hesitate at the bowls, his lips moving as he counted under his breath, eyes flitting from one pile to another. Then he dropped his stone into the gray bowl with a soft clink and stepped back, face pale. Time stretched. The line shrank. Janos Slynt swaggered up with a black stone and dropped it in Ser Alliser's bowl with an audible plunk. glancing around to make sure men had seen. Some did. Some looked away. When at last the last man sat, Pike nodded to the stewards. "Count 'em," he said. "Let's see how foolish we are." The first steward, a lanky youth from White Harbor, poured the black stones out onto the table and began to tally them in little stacks. The second did the same with the white. The third, PYP of all people, took the gray. Jon watched his friend's lips move as he counted, his brows knitting. The hall grew so silent that the crackle of torches sounded like thunder. "Black 62, called the first steward. A murmur rose from Ser Aliser's side of the hall. Men nodded, some slapping Thorn on the back. The knight's thin smile did not reach his eyes. "White 58, said the second. Pike swore under his breath. "Someone stealing from my pile," he grumbled, though there was a ghost of a grin tugging at his mouth. PYP licked his lips. He glanced at Sam, who stared back in breathless expectation. "Gray 63, PYP said, his voice cracking on the last number. "Jon Snow." The room froze. Then voices erupted, a cacophony of disbelief, cheers, curses. Ser Aliser was on his feet, face flushing an ugly red. "This is an outrage," he snapped. "Those stones were tampered with. The boy is half a wildling and the other half a traitor. He let the savage king slip past him, took a spear wife to his bed, and now you'd put him over us." "Ser Aliser," Pike said, raising his voice, "unless you can show those lads' fingers put the stones in the bowls wrong, sit your arse down. The watch has spoken." "He's Ned Stark's bastard," someone shouted from the back. "And what of it?" yelled another. "The Starks never broke faith with the wall." A chorus of competing cries rose, pro and con, bitter and hopeful. Jon felt them washing over him like waves, threatening to drag him under. Bastard. Crow. Lord Commander. He rose slowly, more because men were turning to look than because he meant to. Sam stared at him, face shining with a kind of terrified pride. "Silence!" boomed a new voice from the doorway. Stannis Baratheon stood on the threshold, Davos at his shoulder, Melisandre a red shadow behind. Snow clung to their cloaks. The king's gaze swept the room, taking in the bowls, the stones, the faces. "A king asked to be present," Stannis said, "and it seems I arrived just in time." The hall quieted, grudgingly, like a dog forced to obey. "So," Stannis said, looking straight at Jon, "the crows have chosen their chief. Lord Commander Snow, is it?" Jon's mouth felt dry. "If my brothers will have me, your grace," he said. "The count says they will," Stannis replied, "though not by enough to make it comfortable." Aliser's lip curled. "We are not your subjects, your grace," he said stiffly. "We do not bow to kings." "No," Stannis said. "You bow to the wall, and to the idea behind it. You've just chosen the man who'll bear that idea for you. I am here to see that he lives long enough to make the choice mean something." He stepped into the hall. Men parted before him, leaving a clear path to where Jon stood. "Jon Snow," Stannis said, "you are now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and my offer to you remains." A hush fell again, deeper this time. Jon felt every eye on him. The envy, the resentment, the hope, the fear. His own thoughts hammered against his skull. Lord Commander, King in the North, Crow, Wolf. He drew a breath that tasted of smoke and cold stone. "My duty is to the wall," he said. "To my brothers, to the realm." "Exactly," Stannis said. "And that duty is larger than one black cloak can hold." Davos's gaze met Jon's briefly. There was no pressure there, only a quiet question. "What will you do, lad?" Jon looked down at his hands. They were not shaking. That surprised him. "If there is to be a Lord Commander and a king in the north," he said slowly, "they must not pull against each other. They must pull together, or the wall will crack between them." "Then wear both mantles," Stannis said. "Let the realm see that in the north, crow and king are one." The hall stirred. Men muttered. Someone laughed, nervously. Jon stared at the king, feeling the ground tilt beneath his boots. He had thought the choice would be one or the other. Stannis was asking him to be both, to bear twice the weight on shoulders already bowed. But the wall had not asked to exist either, simply did, and it held. "If I agree," Jon said, his voice low but carrying in the hush, "I will need more than a name. The Watch will need lands, food, men. We can't hold the wall on honor and old stories." "You will have what I can give," Stannis said, "and what we can take from those who have forgotten their duty." Jon's fingers curled into fists. The die had been cast the moment his brothers dropped their stones into that third bowl. "Then hear me, your grace," he said. "If you make me Jon Stark, king in the north, I will not abandon this black cloak. I will be Lord Commander still. The north will not be a kingdom apart from the wall, but its shield and arm. If you can accept that, then—" He swallowed. "Then I will accept your offer." A murmur ran through the hall, shock and wonder and outrage muddled together. Stannis' eyes were like chips of blue ice. For a heartbeat, Jon thought he might refuse, that he might demand a king unencumbered by ancient vows. Then the king nodded once. "So be it," Stannis said. "The north shall have a king who wears black, and the realm shall have a lord commander with a crown of snow." The solar they'd given Stannis at Castle Black was little more than a glorified cell. Bare stone walls, a single narrow slit of a window, a brazier that struggled against the cold. The only luxury was the table, a stout thing scarred by years of rough use, now covered in parchment. Maps lay like flayed skins across the wood. The north unfolded in ink and faded lines. The ragged coast, the hard-boned mountains, the rivers like veins. Tiny tokens marked holds and castles. Wolves for Stark, Krakens for Greyjoy, flayed men for Bolton. Snow swirled outside the slit, ghosting the light. Stannis stood at one corner of the table, hands braced, leaning over the map. Jon stood opposite, his black cloak drawn close. His Lord Commander's cloak had not yet been made, and perhaps never would be in any traditional sense. There were no tailors at the end of the world, only stewards with needles and time. "We cannot strike at all of them at once," Stannis said. "The Boltons at Winterfell, the Greyjoys on the stony shore, the Karstarks at Karhold. We do not have the men. We must choose where the knife goes first." "Winterfell," Jon said without hesitation, "the heart of the north. While the flayed man flies there, every other house is twisted out of true. Some through fear, some through greed." Stannis' mouth tightened. "You'd leave the Krakens unharried to raid and burn unchallenged?" Jon shook his head. "We can send ravens. Warn the Manderleys at White Harbor, the Tallhearts, the Serwins. The north knows how to hide from raiders. But the Boltons—" He looked down at the map, at the little flayed man pin stabbed through Winterfell. "The Boltons are rot at the center. Until they are cut out, the north will never be ours to use against the dead." "Ours," Stannis repeated. "You say it easily for a man who has worn a crown for all of an hour." Jon met his gaze. "You told me it must be ours," he said. "King and Lord Commander together. I'm only using your own words." Stannis snorted softly. It might almost have been a laugh if one squinted. "Davos says you have Ned Stark stubbornness," he said. "I begin to see it. Very well. Winterfell, then. But we cannot march south with what we have now. It would be folly to strip the wall bare while we fight among snowdrifts for one castle." Jon nodded slowly. "The wildlings," he said. Stannis' eyes narrowed. "You would arm the enemy that sat at your gates?" "I would give them a different enemy," Jon said. "Mance Rayder wanted to bring his people south because he feared the dead more than he hated us. If we offer what he could not, land, food, a place, they may fight for us instead of against us." "And if they turn their cloaks the first time they smell weakness?" Stannis asked. "Then we deal with them," Jon said. "But they know this land as well as any northern ranger. Better. If the dead come, they will be the first to fall. They have more reason than anyone to stand with us." Stannis studied him for a long moment. The brazier popped, sending up a small shower of sparks. "You would give them lands," he said at last. "Where?" Jon ran a gloved finger along the map, tracing the line of the wall east to west. "Here," he said, "along the gift, the lands south of the wall that belonged to the Watch by ancient grant. Hard soil, long winters, but good for those who know how to wring life from rock. The Watch can barely feed itself now," Stannis said. "You'd have them share with wildlings." "With free folk," Jon said quietly. "We'll get more from the land if there are hands to work it. And in return, the Watch gains farmers and fighters both. Men who owe their food to the wall are more likely to defend it." Stannis's jaw worked. "You ask me to break 1,000 years of habit," he said. "To settle savages on southern soil, give them the king's pardon, and then trust them not to slit our throats as we sleep." "Yes," Jon said simply. Stannis's eyes flashed. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Both, maybe," Jon said. "But it's the only way I see, unless you can conjure 10,000 knights from Dragonstone's cellars." A corner of Stannis's mouth twitched again. "If I could, I'd have done it before Blackwater," he said. "Very well, we'll speak to your free folk. Offer them terms, but not as supplicants, as a king and a lord commander who know what they're worth." He moved a small token, a simple wooden disc south of the wall along the gift. Another he placed at Winterfell. "First we gather men," he said. "Then we break the flayed man. After that we will see." Jon nodded. His mind was already racing ahead. Names of wildling leaders, villages beyond the wall that might yield willing ears, words that might soften hard hearts without making him sound weak. "You will not like what comes next," Stannis said suddenly. Jon looked up. "I don't like much of what's come so far." Stannis straightened. "If I legitimize you and name you king in the north, it must be public. The lords who still hold to Stark will want to see it. The Watch will want assurance you are not some pretender in a black cloak playing at crowns." "A ceremony," Jon said, the word tasting strange. "Here, at the wall," Stannis said. "Before your brothers. Before whatever wildlings will stand still long enough to watch. Before my men. The more eyes, the better. When I set the crown on your head, I want there to be no doubt whose hand did it." Jon thought of crowns. Shining things of gold and black iron, heavy on the brow. He thought of his brothers in black watching, faces shuddered. "I have no crown," he said. Stannis waved a hand. "We'll forge one," he said. "Iron and bronze. Nothing gaudy. A simple thing. The North does not care for jewels." "No," Jon said. "It doesn't." He felt suddenly as if the room had grown smaller. The air seemed sparse, hard to draw. He imagined kneeling on cold stone while Stannis set a circle of metal on his head, and men who had sworn to be his equals looked on. "What if they refuse me?" he asked quietly. "The lords, the free folk, even my own brothers." "Then you will do as you have always done," Stannis said. "You will hold the line with what you have. A crown does not make you more or less than you were. It only tells men where to look when they need someone to blame." "That's a comfort," Jon said dryly. "It should be," Stannis replied. "Blame is better than silence. Silence is what you get when men no longer expect anything of you at all." He picked up one last token, a small carved wolf, pale against the dark wood. He set it carefully atop Winterfell. "Get used to seeing it there," he said. "The North must." Jon looked at the map at that small, stubborn wolf. His wolf, his father's, the North's. He felt the weight settle on him more fully then, not as a crushing thing, but as a cloak laid over his shoulders. Heavy, yes, but warm in its way. "I'll speak to the men," he said, "and to the free folk when Mance's captains are brought in. If I'm to wear this crown, I'd like them to know what kind of man is under it." "Show them," Stannis said. "Don't tell them. Men in the North trust what they can see." Jon thought of snow and blood and cold steel clearing a path through darkness. "I can do that," he said. The courtyard at Castle Black was a jumble of activity and neglect. Soot-stained snow lay in piles where it had been shoveled and forgotten. Racks of practiced swords leaned drunkenly against the wall. Men in black trudged from armory to barracks to stable, each intent on some task that never seemed to end. Jon walked with Davos along the packed path between the hall and the armory, his cloak pulled tight, the fur at the collar scratching his throat. Ghost trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to sniff at a post or a pile of wood before loping on. The direwolf's presence still raised looks from some of the king's men, but the Night's Watch brothers had grown used to him. Beside Davos walked Shireen, her nose buried in a book nearly half her size. She had insisted on coming, and Stannis, after a long, measuring look, had relented with the words, "Stay within the walls. Do not touch anything that looks like it might fall and kill you." Davos adjusted his pace unconsciously to match hers. His stride had a slight hitch, a reminder of old breaks and new burns. The wind tugged at what remained of his hair. "So that's it then," Davos was saying. "You're to be both crow and king. 2 cloaks for 1 set of shoulders." "It seems so," Jon said. He watched a group of stewards hauling sacks from a wagon, grain, by the look of it. The kind of ordinary work that would keep men alive longer than any crown. "You don't sound pleased," Shireen piped up without looking up from her book. "Boys usually like crowns in the stories." "These aren't stories," Jon said gently. "I know," she said. "Your Grace, Father said so." She peered over the top of the book. "But every story comes from somewhere, even the hard ones." Davos chuckled. "You'll have to forgive her, Snow," he said. "She sees the world in ink and parchment. It's safer there." Jon thought of Stannis's warning to his daughter. No burning, no sacrifice. The words had surprised him when he'd heard them whispered in the hall. Whatever else Stannis Baratheon was, he was not blind to the things he could not bear to lose. "I'm no king yet," Jon told Shireen, "and I doubt I'll ever feel like one if I am. I've spent too many years scrubbing tables and shoveling snow." "Maybe that's what makes you a good one," she said. "The bad kings in books never shoveled anything." Davos gave Jon a sidelong glance. "She has a way of knocking the polish off things," he said. "Even crowns." "I've never had any polish," Jon replied. "Not that anyone noticed, anyway." They reached the practice yard. A few recruits swung blunted blades at straw dummies, their efforts clumsy. Ser Alliser watched from the sidelines, arms folded, his gaze like a blade itself. He did not acknowledge Jon as they passed. That suited Jon well enough for now. "You know what they're saying, don't you?" Davos asked quietly as they skirted the yard. "Some of your brothers, some of the king's men." "I can guess," Jon said. "That I've sold the watch to a southern king. That I'm playing at being Rob with less sense and more snow. That you'll forget who you are," Davos said. "Or who you were. Men fear change, lad. Especially those whose only comfort is that everyone around them is as miserable as they are." "And what do you say?" Jon asked. Davos scratched at his beard. "I say I've seen enough men with crowns to know it's not the metal that matters," he said. "It's what they do when there are no songs to be had for it. I saw you stand up for a fat boy in black when there was nothing in it for you. I saw you ride out to face wildlings because it was needed, not because it would make folk clap your back." He shrugged. "If that lad ends up with a crown of his own, mayhaps the realm is the better for it." Jon's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'll make mistakes," he said. "I already have." "Good," Davos said. "Only fools and corpses make none. Just don't make the same ones twice." Ghost circled back and bumped his head lightly against Shireen's hip. She gasped, then giggled as the direwolf snuffled at her book. "He likes you," Jon said. "He likes the leather," she said, smiling. "But I'll take it." Jon watched the girl stroke Ghost's fur, her scarred fingers gentle. The direwolf tolerated it with the air of a creature that had decided the strange small human was part of his pack. "Lord Snow," called a voice. Jon turned to see Maester Aemon's steward shuffling toward them, cheeks flushed. "The Maester asks for you," he said. "And for Ser Davos, if he can spare the time. He says it's about words." "Aemon has more words than any man on this wall," Davos said. "Lead on." Shireen looked up reluctantly from her book. "Can I come?" she asked. "Maester Aemon would be honored," Jon said, "if your father allows it." "Father said I could learn from anyone who's older than he is," Shireen said. "Maester Aemon must be older than everyone." "He is," Jon said. "In some ways, he's seen more kings than the wall has seen snowstorms." They walked together toward the rookery stairs. Jon felt the eyes on his back. Alistair's cold stare, the speculative glances of stewards, the curious gaze of king's men. He let them slide off him like snow off slate. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see that a crown has not changed the way I walk the yard, or the way I answer the summons of an old blind man. "Davos," Jon said quietly, as they approached the tower, "if I start to forget, if I start to sound like a king more than a brother, I'll remind you," Davos said, loudly if need be. Jon nodded once, grateful. He would need men like Davos Seaworth and Maester Aemon as much as he needed swords and ships. A king without counselors was just a man shouting into the wind, and the wind at the wall could swallow shouts whole. They chose the yard for the ceremony because there was nowhere else large enough. The hall was too cramped, the practice square too cluttered. The yard, at least, could hold them all, the Black brothers, the king's men, the few wildling captains who had been dragged in chains to hear terms. Snow fell in lazy flakes, dusting shoulders and hoods. The sky overhead was a dull, unbroken white, making the world feel smaller. Torches guttered in iron brackets along the walls, their flames pale in the daylight. Jon knelt on the packed stone, the cold biting through his trousers. His black cloak pooled around him like spilled ink. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers splayed. He could feel the eyes on him. His brothers wary, puzzled, angry, the wildlings suspicious, the king's men's calculating. Ghost lay stretched at the edge of the circle, head on his paws, watching everything with red eyes. Before Jon, Stannis Baratheon stood with a small, simple circlet cradled in both hands. It was made of dark iron and bronze, twisted together without ornament. No jewels, no gilding. It looked less like a king's crown and more like a piece of broken chain hammered into a ring. Seemed fitting. Maester Aemon sat wrapped in furs on a chair near the front. His cloudy eyes turned toward the sound of Stannis's voice. Davos stood just behind the king's right shoulder, his expression solemn. Melisandre was a streak of red at the edge of the crowd, watching with an intensity that felt like heat even from a distance. "Men of the Night's Watch," Stannis said, his voice steady and carrying. "And men of the free folk, hear me." The murmurs died down. Snowflakes landed on his beard and melted. This wall was raised by Bran the Builder, when the world was young and the memory of the long night still burned in men's bones. Stannis went on. "Since then, kings have risen and fallen. Crowns have changed heads. Castles have burned and been rebuilt. Yet the wall has stood. It stands still because men like you have held it." He let the words sink in. Many of the Black brothers straightened unconsciously. "The realm owes you more than words," Stannis said. "You have had little else from the south. Little but criminals and cast-offs sent in place of thanks. I cannot mend all the wrongs done to you by kings who cared more for their own comfort than for the wind at your backs. But I can do something." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Jon. "This man you chose as Lord Commander," Stannis said. "Jon Snow, bastard of Eddard Stark. Crow, ranger, oathbreaker in some eyes, savior in others. He has walked beyond the wall, seen what stirs there, and returned to warn you. He has fought for you. He has bled for you." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Jon felt his face flush under the cold. "The North is broken," Stannis said. "Its heart, Winterfell, has been stolen by flayers and traitors. Its wolves have been scattered. Yet the North still remembers. It remembers the Starks who held it for thousands of years. It remembers their oaths to guard this wall." He lifted the circlet, its dark curve stark against the white sky. "I am Stannis of House Baratheon," he said, louder now. "By law and blood, rightful king of these 7 kingdoms, though I have chosen to come here instead of squatting in a nest of swords. By that right, I do now strip from Jon Snow the name of bastard and grant him the name of his father. Jon of House Stark, son of Eddard, I name you trueborn in the eyes of the law." The words struck Jon like a physical blow. For a heartbeat, he could not breathe. All his life, he had worn the name Snow like a stone in his boot. To have it taken away so suddenly felt wrong, as if some part of him had been flayed off. And yet, beneath the confusion, something else stirred. A slow, fierce warmth that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with a boy standing in Winterfell's yard watching his brothers ride off and thinking he never would. "Furthermore," Stannis went on, "by that same right, I declare him king in the north, to rule over all lands from the neck to the wall, so long as he remembers that the first duty of that crown is to this ice beneath our feet." He stepped forward. The yard seemed to hold its breath. "Rise, Jon Stark," Stannis said, "if you will bear this weight." Jon's legs felt numb as he pushed himself up. The world tilted, then steadied. He met Stannis's eyes, saw no triumph there, only a grim acknowledgement of the bargain they were making. "My duty is to the wall," Jon said, his voice steady. "To my brothers, to the realm. I will bear whatever I must to keep it." "Good," Stannis said. "Then kneel once more, not as a crow, but as a wolf who remembers his oaths." Jon sank back to his knees. The cold bit deep. Stannis set the iron circlet on his head. It was heavier than it looked, cold as the air. "Rise, Jon Stark, king in the north," Stannis said again, louder. Jon stood. The yard erupted. Some brothers clapped, uncertainly at first, then with growing conviction. Others glowered, arms crossed. Wildling captains muttered to each other, eyes sharp. The king's men bowed, some more deeply than others. Ghost lifted his head and howled, a low, rolling sound that echoed off the walls. Somewhere, a raven answered with a harsh, "King, king, king." Jon felt the weight of the crown pressing into his hair, the familiar fall of the black cloak across his shoulders. He felt every gaze on him like a touch. He raised a hand, more to steady himself than to call for silence. The yard quieted anyway. "I am still Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," he said. "And I am still your brother if you'll have me. This crown does not change my vows. It only adds to them. The North will not turn its back on the wall while I wear it." He turned, sweeping his gaze across the gathered faces. "To the free folk," he said, voice carrying, "I say this, you wanted to come south to live, not to die, and rise again with blue eyes. I will give you land beneath the wall if you'll swear to fight beside us when the dead come. Not as slaves or fodder, but as men and women with steel in your hands and your children at your backs. Stand with us, and you'll earn a place on the land you defended." A stir ran through the wildlings. Some scoffed, others listened with narrowed eyes. One tall, raw-boned spearwife spat in the snow, but her gaze was less hostile than it had been. "To my brothers," Jon said, turning back to the black cloaks, "I say this, I did not seek this. The wall was enough. But if a crown is what it takes to bring the North's strength to our aid, I will bear it. Judge me by what I do with it, not by how it looks." Dolorous Ed shook his head slowly. "I always knew you'd end up doing something terrible to yourself," he muttered, loud enough for those near him to hear. "But this, even I didn't see this coming." A few men laughed, tension breaking. Janis Slint's face was thunderous. Ser Aliser's expression could have frozen water. Maester Aemon's blind eyes were wet. "Ned's boy," he whispered. "At last." Stannis stepped back, letting Jon stand alone in the center of the circle. For the first time, Jon appreciated the cruelty of crowns. They looked like honors from afar. Up close, they were nothing but circles of metal that told the world where to aim its arrows. He raised Longclaw, the Valyrian steel gleaming dully in the gray light. "The Night's Watch and the North stand together," he said. "Or they fall together. Remember that." Ghosts' howl faded into the cold air. Snowflakes settled on the iron circlet, clinging like tiny, mocking jewels. Jon Stark, king in the north and lord commander of the Night's Watch, lowered his sword and felt the world shift on its axis. That night, the hall smelled of onion, stale beer, and something that had once aspired to be mutton. The stew in Jon's bowl was more water than meat, with a few floating bits of root vegetable doing their best to look substantial. The bread was tough enough to serve as armor in a pinch. Jon ate anyway. Hunger was as constant as the cold at the wall, and he had no intention of letting either see him falter. The iron circlet sat on the table beside his bowl, its dark curve catching the light from the nearest torch. It looked out of place among the chipped crockery and splintered wood. Dolorous Ed poked at his stew as if it had offended him personally. "I always thought if we had a king, he'd get better stew," he said. "Shows what I know. Maybe if you bowed first, they'd give you the pieces with meat in them," PYP said, grinning. He nodded toward where Ser Alliser and Janos Slynt sat at their own table, their bowls notably more generous. "Or at least let you lick Slynt's spoon." "I'd rather eat my own cloak," Ed said. "Less greasy." Gren laughed around a mouthful of bread. Sam smiled weakly, then darted a glance around the hall. The air hummed with something that wasn't quite hostility and wasn't quite acceptance. Brothers talked in low voices, heads bent close. Eyes flicked toward Jon and away again. "You could wear it while you eat," PYP suggested, tilting his head at the crown. "Might keep it from getting stolen, or from being used to hammer nails." "I'm not wearing a crown at supper," Jon said. He dipped his bread in the thin stew and took a bite. "Or at all if I can help it. It's heavy." "Isn't that the point?" Ed said. "If it were light, anyone could wear it. Even me. And then where would we be? Dead?" PYP said promptly. "From boredom." Ed shrugged. "There are worse ways." Sam set his spoon down carefully. "They're scared," he said quietly. "The brothers. Some of them, anyway. They think you'll start ordering them about like a king from stories. Taking rooms for yourself, demanding they kneel whenever you pass." "I barely have a room," Jon said. "And the brothers don't kneel to anyone. They barely stand up straight if they can help it." "That's what I told them," Sam said. "But stories travel fast. Faster than sense." Jon glanced around the hall. He caught sight of a few faces. Old Ser Dennis Mallister from the Shadow Tower, his features thoughtful. Young Satin behind the serving table, watching with wide eyes. Bowen Marsh, the Lord Steward, chewing with his usual air of aggrieved caution. At the far end, Ser Alliser saw Jon looking and held his gaze. There was no deference there, only resentment and something colder. "They'll test you," Ed said. "They tested Mormont. They tested Corrin Halfhand. They test all of us, I suppose, though I fail without even trying." "What about you lot?" Jon asked, forcing his voice light. "Do you plan to test me as well?" PYP leaned back. "Already did," he said. "You passed. Didn't throw that stew at my head when I suggested the crown would keep your hair dry." "That's a low bar," Jon said. "Well," Gren said reasonably, "it's us." They laughed, and the sound eased something tight in Jon's chest. These were his brothers. Whatever else he was, that had not changed. "I won't give orders as a king that I wouldn't give as Lord Commander," Jon said. "And I won't ask anything of you that I won't do myself." "Careful," Ed said. "Men might start expecting that. Then it becomes a habit. And before you know it, we're all living in a world where kings do as much work as anyone else." Horrible thought. PYP shuddered theatrically. "Terrifying," he agreed. Sam fiddled with his spoon. "Janos Slynt is talking," he said, dropping his voice further, "to some of the others, about how you're Stannis' pet now, that you'll turn the Watch into his personal army." "I heard," Jon said. "Let him talk. Slynt's never been half as dangerous with words as he was with a knife in a dark alley." "He's dangerous when men listen," Sam said. "We can't afford to splinter now. Not with, he trailed off, glancing toward the door. As if summoned by the thought, a gust of wind slammed it open for a heartbeat before a steward wrestled it shut again. Snow eddied in, melting on the floor. Not with them out there, Sam finished. Jon looked at the crown, sat where he'd set it, dull and stubborn. I'll speak to them, he said. All of them, tomorrow or the next day. Not as a king demanding loyalty, as a brother explaining what's coming whether they like it or not. Words are wind, Ed said. But at least they're warmer than the wind we've got. Jon pushed his bowl away, appetite fading. Stannis did what he had to, he said. So did I. Now we make it mean something. Or it will just be another story men tell about folly at the end of the world. Could be worse, PYP said. We could be in King's Landing. I'd rather freeze than burn green. Gren nodded fervently. Me too. Jon thought of Blackwater, of stories he'd heard. The sky alight, men screaming as they burned. He thought of Stannis turning his ships north instead of back to that poison city. He chose this, Jon said quietly, when he didn't have to. I'll remember that when he starts being as stubborn as an ice block with a crown. You're stubborn too, Sam pointed out. Jon managed a thin smile. Then perhaps we'll hold, he said. Two stubborn men against the dark. Stranger things have happened. Ed sighed. We joined the Watch because we had nowhere else to go, he said. Now we've got a king and a war at the end of the world. I should have become a baker. You burn bread, PYP said. I'd fit right in then, Ed replied. Seems everyone else is on fire these days. The laughter that followed was weary but real. Around them, the hall began to empty in ones and twos, men shuffling off to cold beds and colder dawns. Jon picked up the crown. For a moment he considered leaving it on the table. Let someone else deal with it. Let it vanish in a stew pot or under a bench. Instead, he slipped it into the crook of his arm and rose. I'll see you lot in the yard at first light, he said. Crown or no crown, the wall won't guard itself. Wonderful, Ed said. Frozen misery with a royal seal on it. Jon smiled despite himself and stepped out into the night, the weight of iron and snow following him. The Lord Commander Solar had never seen so many crowns and titles pressed into so small a space. It was a modest room, stone walls, a narrow hearth, a single table that had done duty as desk, dinner board, and operating slab at various times. A shelf sagged under the weight of old scrolls. A cracked window admitted more cold than light. Around the table, the north leaned over itself in ink and wood. Stannis stood at one end, as always, hands on the table. Jon stood at the other, black cloak draped over the back of the chair. He refused to sit in while others still stood. Davos occupied the side near the hearth, his face lined and intent. Maester Aemon sat wrapped in furs, eyes milky but ears sharp. Beside him stood Bowen Marsh, the Lord Steward, and Dennis Mallister from the Shadow Tower, their expressions tight. This is what we know, Jon said, tapping a finger on the map. Roose Bolton holds Winterfell with what remains of his forces from the south. He's called in Frye men to bolster his claim. The Manderleys at White Harbor are officially allied to him, but Wyman Manderley's not a man to bend easily. If there's resistance to Bolton, it will start there. And the Karstarks? Stannis asked. Karhold is in Karstark hands, Jon said. Torrhen Karstark fought for Robb, but his kin may have bent the knee to the Boltons to save their skins. The Karstarks were always proud. Pride can turn either way. The Umbers, Davos put in. A divided house, Jon said. Great Jon with Robb in the south, smaller kin up here. They hate the Boltons, but they won't move until they see which way the wind blows. They're not fools. And the wildlings? Bowen Marsh said, his tone heavy with disapproval. Thousands of enemies camped on our doorstep, and now you propose to invite them in for bread and butter. I propose to invite them in for bread and steel, Jon said, in exchange for their spears. We can't man the wall with good intentions, Bowen. The lords of the north will not like it, Dennis Mallister said. They barely stomached the Night's Watch dealing with wildlings before, settling them on land. That is another matter. The lords of the North will have to weigh their pride against their survival, Stannis said flatly. If they'd rather die than share a field with a man who can kill whites, they are welcome to choke on their own stubbornness. I have little patience for nobles who'd rather preen than live. His gaze flicked toward Jon. How many wildlings will come over if you offer them this bargain? Jon thought of Mance Rayder, of Tormund Giantsbane's booming laugh, of mothers in ragged furs holding children close as the cold closed in. Not all, Jon said. Some will choose pride, or vengeance, or simply distrust. He traced a line from the wall southward. But enough will. The free folk follow strength. If we show them we have it, and that we're not asking them to crawl on their knees, they'll listen. You'd have them swear oaths? Davos asked. No, Jon said. Their word is not like ours. They don't make promises to crowns. They make them to people, to chiefs, to those they've bled beside. If I fight with them, if I keep my word once, they'll keep theirs. More or less. Marsh sniffed. More or less is not a foundation for the realm, he muttered. It's the foundation we have, Jon said. The dead won't care if our alliances are written in ink or blood, so long as we stand together when they come. Aemon cleared his throat, thin and papery. The last time the Night's Watch stood alone, we nearly fell, he said. I remember my grandfather's stories of the first long night, the tales of those who survived. None of them mentioned how proud they were to die without help. Silence fell at that. Even Stannis inclined his head slightly in the old man's direction. Very well, Stannis said. You speak to your wildlings. Offer them land in the gift, farms under the wall, and the king's protection so long as they take up arms against the dead and any lord who forgets where his true enemy lies. He moved a carved token representing a wildling camp, sliding it south of the wall. As for the lords, he continued, we send ravens to every house still holding a keep or a hall, Stark banners at the top, Baratheon seals at the bottom. Let them see that the wolf has not forgotten them, and that their king remembers his duty. Bowen Marsh looked as if he had swallowed something sour. And if they refuse to recognize this arrangement? He asked, flicking a glance at the iron crown resting on a corner of the table. Then we'll remind them that Bolton's skin men who displeased them, Stannis said. I only ask them to fight for their own lives. They can choose which king they prefer. We should expect some to hedge, Davos said. They'll wait to see if you take Winterfell. If you do, they'll flock. If you don't, he spread his hands. Then we'll not be in a position to worry about them, Stannis said. One war at a time, Onion Knight. Jon pressed his palms flat on the table. His head ached. The responsibilities stacked on each other like towers of stones in a gale. I'll ride to speak with Tormund Giantsbane and the others, he said. They'll listen to me, more than they'll listen to a king in a southern crown. Take some of my men, Stannis said. I'll take brothers, Jon replied. If the wildlings are to believe that the watch means to treat with them instead of hang them, they must see black cloaks at my side, not just crowned stags. Stannis studied him for a moment, then nodded. As you will, he said, but take care. You may trust their fear of the dead. Do not trust their love of you. Men love what is useful until it frightens them. Wise counsel, Aemon murmured. Jon glanced at the old maester. And what do you counsel, maester? He asked. Aemon's blind eyes turned toward the sound of his voice. That the wall has seen many kings and many commanders, he said. Most of Hem believed themselves indispensable. None were. The wall stood because men remembered what they were here for. Remember that, Jon. Whether you wear iron on your brow or black on your shoulders, you are here to hold this line. Everything else is rearrangement. Jon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I'll remember, he said. He looked at Stannis. We're agreed, then. Wildlings in the gift, ravens to the north, and Winterfell as the first blow. Stannis's jaw tightened. We're agreed, he said. We stand together now, Snow. If you falter, we both fall. If I falter, he shrugged. You are young. You may outlive my mistakes. Jon thought of the weight of the iron circlet, of the feel of Longclaw in his hand, of the cold beyond the wall. That's one bet I'd rather not see tested, he said. The Red Woman's chamber had been a storage room once, until Stannis's men cleared out the broken barrels and rusted hooks and gave it to her. Now it belonged to the fire. A small hearth had been dug into the outer wall, its stones blackened by heat. The flames within were not large, but they burned with an intensity that belied their size. The room smelled of smoke, strange herbs, and the faint copper tang of old blood. Melisandre stood before the fire, hands raised, eyes fixed on the shifting tongues of light. Her ruby gem pulsed at her throat in time with the flicker. She had expected the fire at the wall to feel different. Colder, perhaps, or reluctant. Instead, it was sharper, as if the ice around it cut away distractions and left only the core. She whispered words in Ashai, in the traitor tongues of the East, in the old language her mother had spoken by the sea. Names of R'hllor, names of shadows, names of things that burned. Show me, she murmured. Show me the path. Show me the prince that was promised. Show me Azor Ahai, reborn to fight the darkness. The flames leapt, licking higher. For a moment they were only fire, orange and red, blue at the base. Then they twisted, their colors deepening, shapes emerging like figures behind mist. She saw a stag first, antlers catching the light, running across snow. Behind it came a wolf, lean and gray, its paws silent. They ran side by side for a few heartbeats, then the stag stumbled. The wolf slowed, turned back, and set its shoulder under the stag's neck, holding it up. Stannis, she breathed. And the boy. The stag faded. The wolf grew larger, its fur darkening, its eyes two coals of ember red. A shadow crowned its head, not metal, but something like light in the shape of iron. Jon Stark, she whispered. The name felt strange on her tongue. King of snow and crows. The flames shifted. Behind the wolf, she saw another shape. A great shadow with wings spread wide, flame licking along its edges. A dragon. Its scales were not clear, sometimes black, sometimes red, sometimes gold. Its eyes shone like molten metal. Daenerys, she murmured. The Targaryen girl. The one who woke stone dragons. The dragon and the wolf circled each other in the flames, uneasily. Between them, the stag flickered, smaller now, its shape less distinct. Beyond them all, a darkness pressed against the edges of the vision. Something cold and vast, deeper than night. Melisandre's breath quickened. Sweat beaded at her temples, though the room was chill. Who is the prince? She asked the fire. Who is Azor Ahai? Show me his face. The flames roared up, turning white at the core. For an instant, she saw a figure standing against a tide of blue shadows, a sword in hand. The sword burned with a fierce light, but its shape was wrong. Too plain, too familiar. Not Lightbringer, a bastard blade forged anew. The figure's face flickered between two men. One had Stannis's hard jaw, his eyes grim and unyielding. The other had Jon's dark hair, his stark eyes, his mouth set with the same stubborn lines. No, she whispered. Choose. You must choose. The fire did not oblige. The two faces bled into each other, becoming something else. Something that was both and neither. A man who bore king's blood and wild blood, fire and ice. The sword in his hand flared, then cracked at the tip, splitting into two blades that burned side by side. Melisandre staggered back, the vision shredding in an instant. The fire was only fire again, panting in the hearth like something used and tired. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer. This is not what I asked, she said softly. You mock me. The flames danced, indifferent. She turned away, pacing the small chamber. For years, she had believed the path clear. Stannis was the prince that was promised. The flames had shown him to her again and again. Standing on battlefields, his shadow long, a sword of burning light in his hand. She had followed those visions across half the world. Now the fire whispered of wolves and dragons, of another king who wore no crown of swords but one of snow, of a girl across the sea with fire in her veins and dragons at her back. Perhaps, she said slowly, the Lord of Light does not choose as men choose. Perhaps he sets many pieces upon the board and lets the darkness test them all. She moved back to the hearth, staring into the embers. Somewhere beyond the wall, cold eyes watched the living. Their hunger did not care who bore what title, only that there was flesh to devour and breath to steal. Melisandre knelt. The stone was hard under her knees. "Very well," she murmured. "If your purpose is not bound to one man, I will not bind myself to one either. Stannis is still needed. So is the wolf boy and the dragon girl. All of them are flames in the dark." She smiled, thin and sharp. "And all flames can be guided," she said, "if one knows where to set the tinder." She held her hands above the fire again, feeling its heat, its wild hunger. "In the snow," she whispered, "the brightest flame will be the one that does not go out. I will watch them all, and when the time comes, I will choose where to place my faith." The fire crackled, as if amused. Melisandre's eyes reflected the flames, red and unblinking. Outside, the wind howled against the wall, an old, weary sound. Inside, the Red Woman and her god considered wolves, stags, dragons, and the long night that came for them all. They chose the space beneath the wall's shadow for the parley, a flattened stretch of ground where carts usually waited and wildlings had huddled as prisoners only days before. Now the ropes and chains still hung from posts, but some wrists were free of them. That, more than anything, made the air feel like a tinder waiting for a spark. Tormund Giantsbane stood at the front of the wildlings, his red beard bristling, his great frame half-wrapped in a patched fur cloak. Scars crisscrossed his face, his arms, the backs of his hands. There were chains on his wrists still, though they were loosely held, more symbol than restraint. Around him clustered other free folk leaders, a wiry spearwife named Rattleshirt's widow, a hollow-cheeked man with eyes like chips of flint, a tattooed giant of a raider with a broken nose. Behind them, hundreds more wildlings pressed in. Their clothes were a patchwork of furs and leather, their faces lean and wary. Children peered from behind their mothers' legs. The wind tugged at everything, carrying the smell of sweat and smoke and old fear. Jon stood facing them, ghost at his side. He wore his black cloak and the iron circlet both, the crown sitting awkwardly above hair that had never been meant for such ornaments. Longclaw hung at his hip. He could feel the eyes on him. Wildlings who had tried to kill him, wildlings he had fought beside, wildlings who had never seen a man like him stand in both black and iron. Above, on the rampart, Stannis Baratheon watched, his cloak snapping. Davos stood beside him, leaning on the parapet. Melisandre was a red shadow a little farther off. "You look like you swallowed your own boots, boy," Tormund called out, grinning despite the chains. "What did that king put on your head? A wagon wheel? A bit of old iron," Jon said. His breath smoked in the air. "It weighs less than your tongue." Some of the free folk laughed. Others scowled. "You know why we're here," Jon went on. "You wanted south. You broke yourselves and your people against this wall to get it. Now winter is coming, and the dead are walking. You can't go back. You can't go forward without us." "We can go through you," growled the tattooed raider. "You tried that," Jon said. "It didn't go well." Tormund's grin faded. "We tried," he said. "And a lot of good folk died. Folk who never wore a crown or a bloody cloak, and never would have." Jon nodded. "I was there," he said. "I saw them fall. I saw the dead rise, too. And I've seen more since." He looked out over the crowd, letting his gaze rest on faces. A woman with a scar across her nose. A boy missing 2 fingers. An old man with only one eye. "I can't give you the South you dreamed of," he said. "No warm halls with fat tables. No green fields like in your stories. All I can offer is this land south of the wall where you can build your own halls." fields you can scratch food from with your own hands, and a place in the shield we're trying to hold up against the dead. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The word land echoed like a stone dropped into a well. What's the price? Rattleshirt's widow demanded. There's always a kinslaying price with you kneelers. Jon met her gaze. You fight with us, he said. When the dead come, when the Boltons come, when anything that wants to turn this world into bones and ashes comes, you stand in the shield wall instead of trying to break through it. That's the price. And whose land is it? The hollow-cheeked man asked. Some lord's with a fancy bit of paper? Or ours? It's the watches by old Grant, Jon said. The kings gave it to us 1,000 years ago so we could feed ourselves. We haven't done a good job of it. You will. The watch will hold the wall and tend what it can. You'll work the rest. It'll be yours, so long as you hold the line with us. That king of yours agrees to this? Tormund asked, nodding upward. He looks the sort to get fussy when folk don't bow where he likes. He agrees, Jon said. He knows we need every sword, every spear. Up on the rampart, Stannis' expression did not change, but he did not contradict. And what if some pink man with flayed skins on his banners comes to take it? Rattleshirt's widow pressed. Do we feed him too, or just our children? If the Boltons come, we fight them, Jon said. You and us together. If we're dead by then, you can do what you like. Fight for you, muttered the tattooed raider. Fight for the wall. Fight for some king who burned his own brother in a fire. Stannis didn't burn his brother, Jon said sharply. Lawloress shadows did that, and his brother chose his fate long before the fire ever touched him. A few of the wildlings spat. We don't care for your red god, Tormund said. Or your seven-faced one, or your old dead trees. We've our own ways. I'm not asking you to change gods, Jon said. I'm asking you to choose enemies. The dead are coming. The Boltons are flaying men and calling it law. You can fight them with us, or you can wait until there's no one left to stand beside. He stepped forward, just enough to make them feel his nearness. I lived among you, he said. I shared your fires. I loved one of you and watched her die with an arrow in her chest because of this war. I know what you are. You're not kneelers. You're not slaves. You're free folk. So be free. Choose your own path. But don't pretend there isn't a cliff at the end of it. The wind gusted, plucking at cloaks and hair. Tormund watched him with narrowed eyes. Slowly, the big man lifted his bound hands. You always did talk too much for a crow, he said. But you speak true more often than not. I've seen the dead. I've seen your brothers fight them. Seen you fight my own folk too. He spat in the snow. Fine, I'll take your offer. Give me land where my people can build and not be hunted like beasts, and I'll put my spear in the gut of anything that comes for us. Dead or pink. A rustle went through. The wildlings. Some shouted assent. Others growled protests. But more than a few faces eased. Just a little. And the rest of you? Jon called out. Will you take this bargain? Or will you go north and see if the dead will treat you better? An old woman with a tangle of gray hair stepped forward. My son died on that bloody green fork, she said, pointing at the wall. Trying to climb your damned ice. My husband froze on the fist. I've no love for your crows. But I've less for things that wear my kin's faces with blue eyes. I'll take land if it means my grandchildren sleep with roofs over their heads. Others followed. Not all, maybe not even most, but enough. Jon nodded. Then we'll start, he said. Groups will be assigned lands. You'll send your best fighters to train with my men. We'll make something of this or we'll die trying. He glanced up at the rampart. Stannis' face was carved stone, but Davos's mouth had softened into something like hope. This is madness, Rattleshirt's widow muttered as the crowd began to break apart, free folk arguing among themselves, letting wolves and crows and stags pretend they've got a pack together. Maybe, Tormund said, but winter's a mad time, and I'd rather howl in a pack than die alone. Jon exhaled. The wall loomed behind him, ancient and silent. Before it, a new arrangement was being born. Clumsy, fragile, full of old hatreds and new vows. He felt the weight of his crown, of his cloak, of the many eyes watching. This is what Stannis meant, he thought. Not thrones, not songs, choices, made one after another with no time to breathe. Ghost pressed against his leg. Jon rested a hand on the direwolf's head. "We'll make it hold," he murmured. To the wolf, to himself, to the wall. "We have to." Night at the wall had a particular kind of silence. It was not the silence of a sleeping city, full of muffled sounds and distant life. It was a vast, listening quiet, broken only by the wind and the occasional creak of ancient ice adjusting its weight. Jon stood on the rampart, cloak wrapped tight, crown cold against his brow. The wall beneath his boots thrummed faintly, as if some old memory pulsed within it. The world beyond was a black expanse, the line between sky and land erased. Stannis stood beside him, hands tucked into his sleeves, breath steaming. The king's face was turned north, his eyes narrowed against the stinging snow. For once, there was no retinue trailing him, no red woman, no onion knight, just the two of them and the cold. "The free folk will hate you for this," Stannis said after a time, "for binding them to the wall, for making them settle instead of run." "I know," Jon said. "The lords of the north will hate you too," Stannis continued, "for giving their land to raiders, for setting a wildling chief up as their neighbor." "I know," Jon repeated. "The watch will grumble that you've sold them to a king," Stannis said, "and the south will forget you exist until the dead are clawing at their gates." Jon glanced at him. "Is this your way of comforting me, your grace?" he asked. Stannis snorted. "This is my way of telling you that if you were waiting for applause, you chose the wrong war," he said. "I have never cared for men's approval. I care for the work. It seems you do too. That is why we stand here, instead of in a warmer hall." Jon turned his gaze back to the dark. Somewhere out there, the Night's King, or whatever name the others gave their leader, gathered his strength. He imagined pale figures moving among trees, the soft crunch of snow under dead feet. "I used to think the worst thing in the world was to be a bastard," Jon said quietly. "To stand in my father's hall and know I'd never sit at his right hand. To walk past my siblings and wonder if they saw me as truly one of them. And now," Stannis asked. "Now I think the worst thing would be to fail them," Jon said. "All of them, the ones under the ground and the ones still breathing. To let this wall fall and know I could have done more." Stannis nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Good," he said. "Then we are of one mind there as well." He shifted, the sound of his boots on the ice small in the vastness. "When I left Dragonstone," Stannis said, "I thought I was giving up my only chance at the Iron Throne. The fire showed me ice and shadows and told me my war lay here. I cursed it. I cursed the gods. I cursed the sea that brought me north." He paused. "Now, standing here, it does not feel like loss." Jon studied him. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Like the thing I was made for," Stannis said. "As if all the petty wars and sieges before were practice for this. I do not know if I will live to see it done, if any of us will. But I know this work suits my hands better than scratching at a nest of vipers in the capital." Jon thought of Cersei Lannister, whom he had never seen, of Joffrey dead now if the rumors were true, of petty lords and great houses scrambling for advantage while the true enemy gathered in silence. "Sometimes I envy them," Jon admitted. "Their wars are small, understandable. Who sits a chair, who marries whom, who owns what field. They can win or lose and still sleep under a roof. They are children squabbling over toys while the house burns," Stannis said. "I do not envy them their ignorance." Snowflakes landed on Jon's lashes and melted. "What happens if we succeed?" Jon asked suddenly. "If we hold the wall, if we drive the dead back, if we live?" Stannis was silent for a long moment. "Then we will look south," he said at last, "and see what is left. We will mend what we can, cut away what we must, and endure what we cannot change. That is all any king can do in the end. That is all any man can do. And if we fail? Jon asked. Then there will be no one left to remember our names, Stannis said, which will make the squabbles over them seem very foolish in retrospect. Jon huffed a breath that might almost have been a laugh. You have a strange way of making a man feel better, he said. I am not here to make you feel better, Stannis replied. I am here to help you do what must be done, as you are here to help me. Jon looked at him, really looked, at the lines around his eyes, carved deeper by losses, at the set of his mouth, stubborn and grim, at the way his shoulders squared against the wind. You turned your back on the Iron Throne for this, Jon said. On the chance to sit where your brother Saturday. Yes, Stannis said. I did. Why? Jon pressed. Truly, not for law. Not for duty. Why? Stannis's jaw worked. For a moment Jon thought he might refuse to answer. Then the king's gaze shifted, northward again. Because when I looked into the fire, he said slowly, and saw that wall and those dead walking, and the world covered in night, I knew I could not pretend I had not seen it. I could not go back to fighting for chairs and crowns and leave this for some other fool to face. He snorted. There are not so many fools with armies that I could trust one would show up. You could have ignored it, Jon said. Many would have. I am not many, Stannis said. I am myself, for better or worse. And I have done enough lesser evils in service of greater goods that I would not let this be another one. I chose the north because if I won the south and lost this, it would all be dust in the end. Jon nodded slowly. Then we stand together, he said. King and whatever I am. King and Lord Commander, Stannis said. Wolf and Stag. For now. For now, Jon echoed. They stood in silence a while longer, two dark shapes on the edge of the world. Behind them, torches sputtered. Below, men slept, snored, dreamed, woke, and shivered. Beyond the wall, something moved in the dark. Jon felt fear, yes. He felt the weight of his crown and his cloak and his sword and his choices. But beneath that, like the slow, steady beat of a heart, he felt something else. Not hope, not yet. Resolve. We'll hold, he said quietly, more to himself than to Stannis. Whatever comes, we'll hold. Stannis did not answer with words. He only reached out and set a gloved hand briefly on Jon's shoulder, a touch as awkward as the man himself and as honest. Then he turned away, his cloak snapping as he made for the stairs. Jon remained a moment longer, eyes on the dark. Ghost's distant howl rose from somewhere below, long and low, answered by the soft croak of a raven. The king who chose the north and the wolf who wore a crown of snow had taken their stand. The long night was coming. They would meet it together.